Hey everyone. Sorry, a little nervous. My name's Tim Scornia. I'm the newest Mountmaker here at the Getty. Pleasure to be here. So a little bit of housekeeping for tomorrow with the tours. If you have your badge, you have to bring your badge tomorrow, so you can get through for security reasons. So, anyways, so our first presenters will be Barry Austin. Right, Barry Austin, art handle installation specialist. Arthur Boinkman, art handler installation specialist. Philip Brutz, Mountmaker. Beth Edelstein, head of objects conservation. Carlo Maggiara, Mountmaker for the Cleveland Museum of Art. And the title of this presentation is Reuniting Krishna and his mountain at the Cleveland Art Museum. So, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be speaking about a 4-year conservation and remounting project of this sculpture of Krishna lifting Mount Govardhan at the Cleveland Museum of Art. The success of this project depended on many different colleagues and teams within the museum, partners in Cleveland and around the U.S., and international collaborations with colleagues in Cambodia and France. We're especially happy to have a chance to focus on the mount making aspects of this project. I'll start with a quick background about the sculpture and its history, and how it came to present such a mount making and installation challenge. The sculpture hails from the temple site of Phnom Da in southern Cambodia. There were 8 larger-than-life-size stone sculptures at Phnom Da depicting Vishnu and his avatars and relatives. 2 of the 8 sculptures depicting Krishna lifting Mount Govardhan, showing the 8-year-old boy god with his left arm raised. These sculptures show Krishna in the act of lifting a mountain overhead to shelter his village from a storm, a miraculous feat that revealed his divinity. One of these is currently in the collection of the Cleveland Museum of Art, and the other at the National Museum of Cambodia in Phnom Penh. The sculpture made its way to Cleveland in 2 parts. First was the torso, which had come into the collection of Adolphe Soclet, a wealthy collector in Brussels, and was sold to the museum in 1973 after Soclet's death. And second, the rest of the body parts. A large group of fragments had been found at the temple site in 1935 and shipped off to Soclet in Brussels. He attempted a reconstruction, but decided he preferred to leave the torso as a fragment. The rest of the pieces were buried in the neighbor's garden, where they stayed for 3 decades or so until the Cleveland Museum of Art excavated them in 1977 and brought them back to Cleveland. There were 17 pieces in all found in the garden, including more limbs that could fit on one figure, and 2 large pieces, one the lower part of a stela with feet, and upper section of the stela with a left hand. Conservators at the CMA in 1977 were thus presented with a puzzle, and it proved challenging to assemble a complete figure. The top section with the hands seemed to fit, but it was difficult to line it up with the base section with the feet. The CMA at the time chose to create a standing figure and reassembled the torso with the legs and feet, leaving the top section, along with 8 other pieces, unused. The unused pieces were returned to Cambodia in 2006, and 6 were used to complete the other Krishna torso that had been found later at Phnom Da, though it was clear to the conservator there that the upper stela section did not fit with this torso. About a decade later, in 2014, the question of this fragment's proper attribution was reopened. Digital 3D models as well as full-scale prints were used to show that this section does in fact fit well on the back of the CMA torso, and it was returned to Cleveland in 2015 with the goal of creating a complete figure. 3D modeling was a huge component of this project, touching on many different aspects, including, of course, mount making, as we will see. The first overall scan was made in 2014 and was done at the suggestion of Philip Brutz, mount maker at the CMA and our co-author today. who had discovered that nearby Case Western Reserve University had a new laser scanner available for use at ThinkBox, their prototyping and maker space. The CMA worked with ThinkBox staff to scan the Cleveland Krishna and then to integrate this scan with one of the hand section, which had been scanned earlier that year while the Cambodian Krishna was on loan to the Met in New York. The resulting model is shown on the right and is the sculpture everyone expected to end up with at the end of this project. Three printed models were made to help inform and facilitate the integration of the hand section into the figure, a full scale, a quarter scale, and even a pocket size. A number of digital models were also made and utilized along the way in addition to the initial laser scan, including various photogrammetry models done in-house and a full series of LiDAR scans and photogrammetry done by an outside team working on the exhibition content. This video shows the first photogrammetry model in which each of the blue squares represents a photo used to create the model. The conservation project to disassemble the entire sculpture and reintegrate the hand section began in early 2018. As the sculpture came apart over the following couple of years, we began to question the choices made in 1978 to unite the torso with the legs and feet. We continued to use 3D modeling and scanning to assess this, and traded 3D models and measurements back and forth with our colleagues in Cambodia to determine if the legs, feet, and base might in fact belong to the other Krishna in Phnom Penh. The 3D models, along with petrographic analysis and CT scanning of the stone, eventually gathered clear evidence that 3 sections of the legs, as well as the large base section with feet, should in fact be reunited with the Krishna sculpture in Cambodia. These sections were returned to Phnom Penh in late 2020. We also resolved that the right shin, sent back to Cambodia in 2006, belongs with the CMA figure, so this was brought to Cleveland as a long-term loan. The resulting sections now in Cleveland are highlighted here. The gray sections are now all in Cambodia. This meant that we now had about 900 pounds of stone that had to float in midair. The mount also had to accommodate the lower leg section and allow that to be placed in the correct position in space. I'm now going to turn it over to Carlo Maggiora, contract mount designer for the Krishna project.
The primary mounting support I had designed to incorporate the base section now had to be revised with this new information. The entire mounting system had been designed from the start to hold all the stone sections separate from each other while allowing them to be aligned properly. We wanted to keep the pieces separate in part because it had been so difficult to take them apart and because we wanted to allow for future changes to the assembly in case other fragments were identified in the future. Keeping them separate also allows for easier transport both within the museum and for external loans. The primary mounting frame consists of a column assembly with receivers to support the upper section and the torso, and a base assembly that supports and stabilizes the weight above. This base also takes the place of the sculpture's original plinth, which remains today in Phnom Da and on your right. The column is separate from the base for transport. The base has wheels for moving it and adjustable leveling feet, as well as floor anchors for seismically active locations. Now, we will take you through the 4 parts of the mount from top to bottom. The upper section, with the figure's left hand, is in a fixed position with the sides perpendicular to the floor. Philip designed and fabricated a backplate with 2 clips at the sides and 2 shelves at the bottom with 2 pins that fit into pre-existing holes in the underside of the object. This mount incorporates a cleat that slides over a corresponding plate on the primary mount's column and is bolted in place at the back with 2 angle brackets. Philip also designed a lifting apparatus that bolts to the backplate and allows the hand to be easily moved and placed with a hoist. Finally, he made a floor stand that allows the section to remain upright at all times during moving, installation, and travel, reducing the need for handling. I designed and fabricated the torso mount, which consists of a solid steel T-shaped outrigger mirroring the original stone strut between torso and back stela. The bracket is secured to the torso with 2 5/8 cap screws inserted into anchors set into existing holes in the back. While we don't have room to discuss it here, we worked with engineering consultants in Case Western to assess the security of this cantilevered assembly. On the other end of the arm are 2 steel plates that are inserted into the receiver in the primary mount's column. Here, you can see the plates have slots to adjust position. On the right, you're looking at the back of the column with the torso mount in place and the receiver opening. Steel shim plates were fixed to the top and bottom of the receiver after the proper placement was determined. One of these plates on the top stays loose to allow for insertion and removal of the mount. Once in place, the mount is attached to the column with 8 bolts through the top and bottom plates. I'm going to pass the microphone now to Barry Austin, installation specialist, for the rest of this presentation.
Carlo designed the receiver slot plates, shim plates, and allowed for maximum adjustability while working toward the desired alignment between the torso and upper stela sections. This was one of the most challenging aspects of the mount design, as the 2 pieces needed to be precisely aligned to allow the figure's left arm to line up with his hand. Many months were spent on preliminary drawings, mock-ups, measurements from objects, and the 3D models. We then all gathered back at the museum right after the COVID shutdown and worked with both full-scale 3D printed model of the parts and the stone pieces themselves to further refine the alignment of the torso mount. We lost count of how many times we lifted and aligned the torso with the hand section, getting ever closer to the final result. This stage was greatly facilitated by a custom lifting mechanism that allowed the torso to be lifted from a prone position, rotated upright, and moved carefully into the primary mount, where it could be shifted in all directions in small increments. To make it more complicated, the stone pieces don't slide straight into place, but must be rotated slightly into each other to achieve the proper alignment. Along the way, we also had the opportunity to consult with a digital modeling expert who was creating content for the upcoming Krishna exhibition. Using Blender, he was able to provide critical angle measurements for each part of the torso mount relative to established vertical and horizontal planes. The left thigh has a sliding dovetail mount with 2 small set screws at the bottom. There was an existing gap between the thigh and the torso that allowed for these thin plates to be inserted. On the thigh section, the existing pins from the previous restoration were left in place as they were too close to the surface to remove. These were made into anchors for affixing the dovetail plate. On the torso side, new anchors were set with epoxy using a release agent on the threads so they can ideally be more easily removed in the future. Finally, the lower leg has a mount that had as much adjustability built in as possible, as the exact position of the leg was in the process of being finalized as we got to this point. The position was ultimately determined with reference to a conjectural 3D model of the Krishna as he would have looked completed, based largely on other sculptures from Phnom Da. For the exhibition, the Cambodian Krishna, now reunited with his legs and feet, traveled to Cleveland, and the two were displayed side by side. Two other Phnom Da sculptures were also borrowed, along with other related stone artworks. This is the final installation in the Cleveland exhibition, showing fabricated cladding that hides the mount and recreates the form of the stone stela behind the figure as well as the plinth. Earlier this year, the exhibition traveled to Washington, D.C., where we successfully installed and deinstalled the Krishna at the National Museum of Asian Art. The sculpture is now back in Cleveland and awaiting installation on in our permanent galleries. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and we will go on to questions.
So now we'll open it up for questions for Arthur and the rest of the crew.
I'll start with the virtual question for all of you, and thank you for that talk. What adhesive was used for the receivers in the sculpture?
I'm going to let Beth take that one.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
So for the torso in the back, we used a Hilti epoxy RE500. And we did do some thorough testing of that with the engineering department at Case Western University. And then, show and tell. Here's a threaded anchor that you can see we modified an existing Hilti anchor and put that in with the RE500 epoxy. And then when we put anchors into the thigh, we used aerolite epoxy. Yeah, with a release agent. So when we were taking the sculpture apart, everything had been attached with giant steel rods and lots of epoxy and polyester resin. And it was really hard to get anything out. And it took a lot of time and a lot of risk to the stone. So we wanted to minimize that. But we couldn't really come up with a completely different way of supporting the torso. So we did line the recesses in the torso with B72 before we put the Hilti epoxy in with the anchors. And then in the thigh, we tried using a release agent on the threads of the anchor before we put it into the epoxy, so that ideally we'd be able to turn it out. And we have a picture of that if anybody's interested in more details, but I won't go there right
now. What, if any, engineering resources did you have when you were determining the sort of size and scale of the mount? Because I assume that it's all structurally welded, and I was curious if your design went through engineer approval.
So I guess I'll take the first part of that. So initially in the rigging and moving of Krishna, we determined center of gravity, mass distribution of the stone, and the general positioning. When it came down to the actual tang mount design in the back of the torso, that's when the consultation with the engineering school at Case came into effect. I think Beth and Philip.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We also did work with actually two different outside engineering firms. We worked with Silman Engineering in New York and also a firm here in Cleveland to review the entire design of the mount, assess all of the forces that would be on all of the parts. It was, let's see, they made some modifications to the hand mount, for example. So we reviewed all of those parts with an engineering firm. And then the tests on the actual epoxy that we chose for the anchors was done with the engineering school.
Hi, Not really a question, but more of just a commendment. It's great design on a lot of levels. One, the adjustability of the mount design is brilliant. I have to say that was thought of in advance and gives you the flexibility to adapt as you're working with those difficult pieces. And then also the rigging, or not the rigging, but the lack of having to do rigging, that you've thought of that as well, as incorporating the mount sections into external mounts that could be used for transport. And so you didn't have to do all of the complicated rigging so I just wanted to say that wonderful that you thought of that.
Yeah, for the most part, rigging was very minimal. The apparatus that Philip built to fit onto the lift truck forks allowed us full rotation, and we could block it in place, so we didn't have to worry about drift over time and keeping the sculpture up in the air. Crating was done for the most part exterior blow away crates, so it was built around the platforms and the hand section, which just bolts directly into a crate, which minimizes the handling.
I just wanted to say I think it's great that over here that everybody was willing to share and exchange components of the two statues, and it's really cool that they were both exhibited together. I think you just answered my question, but you don't have to disassemble it to transport it then?
We do. The thigh section comes off. The dovetails are slid together and held with two small set screws or grub screws. So each section, the thigh, the calf, the torso, and the hand all have their individual packings. The thigh and the calf go together in a single crate. So it does come apart for transport and for storage. So. Amazing answer. Thank you. Sure. Oh, that's good. Yeah. Yeah, so we just used a bag covering, and then our initial layering for packing was we took a scan and CNC cut foam to fit the torso, and then we used those layers to create the bedding that the torso would sit on, and then we allowed for a strap for transport because we do have to lift him out of that. And put them on a working stand so that we can attach the mount, which is 75 pounds. It's solid steel, machined, and has a fix-it interface that's lined against the back of the torso. But that mount also provides a great counterweight for the body itself, which is head heavy, shoulder and head heavy. So in the case of our last installation, we had some equipment difficulties, so we actually used chain falls and strap, a regular rig for installation, but the counterweight of the mount actually made it pretty enjoyable, almost relaxing. It might have just been the look on his face, but, so.
I think that's just how strong Arthur is, actually.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, I love building massive mounts like this, and this has been so spectacular to look at and to see what you've done, but I'm totally curious, what is the weight of the mount when it's fully installed?
So the primary mast and base is 1,100 pounds. The tang in the torso is 75. The post and contoured shaped steel mount for the shin is about 3.5 pounds. The plate for the hand stela is about 45 pounds altogether. I believe that's with the lifting mechanism that bolts on the back. And the thigh dovetails, it's kind of a negligible weight. It's a steel alloy, so the weight is negligible.
1,100 pounds was perfect.
Yeah, well, that's just the stand.
Once you exceed that weight, then it's all just kind of extra, but that's really wonderful. Congratulations.
Right. Any other? Anybody? Going once? Going twice? No. Thank you.
I can't quite hear what's going on. We have a few parts of the mount here. If anybody has questions in particular, we have a mock-up of the torso mount, the lifting mechanism, and some other things. If anybody has any other questions about those assemblies.
All right. Well, it was an excellent presentation and an excellent mount. I love the idea of incorporating the lifting apparatus to the mount itself. Oh, there is a question. Oh, sorry.
Just real quick, do you have photos, or can we see the dovetail mount again?
Why, yes, we do. I don't have the.
Are you sure?
It's not in that one.
Oh.
We just have to show the real deal.
Here's a prototype. Let's see, can you see? So this is an aluminum prototype, but the real one is McMaster Carr's ultra strength steel. I guess you really can't see it very well. Yeah. This is just a prototype, but it slides back and forth. And I put nylon tip set screws at the bottom of it. So this would fit up in between the, where's this? Here you go. It would fit between these two surfaces. The reason why this actually can happen is we didn't have time to talk about it in the talk, but this was kind of brutally hacked apart to turn it into a seated Buddha. So if you can visualize this as a seated Buddha, that's why they did it. And so they literally just took it apart with pickaxes at the beginning of the last century. And so there's a lot of loss in this area, which allows us to fit a dovetail in between those two surfaces. Ordinarily, when you have a broken sculpture, you wouldn't have the room to put that in there. So this is one of the few times you could actually do that. And it was just seemed to be the logical thing for me to do. I puzzled at it. First, I was going to have external mounts. And of course, nobody liked that, the look of it. They really wanted to just float. They said, well, figure out somehow to make it like, and I'm like, I don't know. And then I don't know how I thought about it. I guess looking at the milling machine, I was sitting there, and the inspiration is the dovetails on a milling machine or on a like a hard-inch lathe, you know, how they have the dovetails. That was the inspiration for it. But basically, it goes together like this, and then there's set screws that are just very fine at the bottom, just in case. It's really belt and suspenders, because it's really not going to slip apart. But those nylon tip set screws go in and lock it just like you'd lock on the milling machine, your Bridgeport. You lock it to keep it from moving. So that's the inspiration for it. I didn't have pictures, huh? On the slideshow.
They're in the first slideshow.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they're in the first slideshow. I don't know if they could rewind it.
What was the name of that product again? You said from McMaster, you ordered it just as is?
Hey guys, we can't hear you. You might have been muted.
Okay, it is not a ready-made product. I had to mill it with a dovetail cutter, so I had to make this. It's not something you just buy. I bought the ultra steel. I forget what they call it. I could look it up here real quick.
So you machined that piece?
Yes, out of ultra. Look up McMaster Carr. Look up ultra strength steel. They use it for bridges, real high strength applications. I just tried to find the strongest. Because it's so thin, I had to find the dovetails are minimal. So I had to find something that just couldn't possibly fail. And so I chose that. It milled really nicely.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
We miss you, Philip. Excellent. Okay. So our next presentation is Column Strong, Mountmaker Museum of New Zealand, Wellington, New Zealand, and Even the Bird Needs Bones to Fly.
He tohu whakamaharatanga, kia ora, tonu te Aotearoa. Kia ora koutou, greetings to everyone. Thank you for the introduction and a massive thank you for the opportunity to present at the International Mountmakers Forum at the Getty Centre today. I'd like to share with you a story about the artist Rolf Houtere from Aotearoa, land of the long white cloud, more commonly known as New Zealand, and the challenges involved in mounting, transporting, and installing his work, Black Phoenix. It's a colossal installation of the remains of a burnt-out fishing boat weighing 1,800 pounds. It juts out from the wall and is flanked by charred timbers spanning 42 foot, etched back to reveal the natural timber below. For today's talk, I'll give you a quick introduction to the National Museum of New Zealand, where I've been mount making for the past 11 years. I'll give you some context to the artist and how Black Phoenix came into existence before we dive into the mount making process from design to installation. So I'd just like to start with acknowledging Te Papa Tongarewa, Container of Treasures, which is the National Museum of New Zealand. Te Papa is located in the capital city, Wellington, and much like Los Angeles, is situated on the Ring of Fire in a highly active seismic region. For those that follow Lord of the Rings might know it as Middle-earth, or more recently with the Rings of Power, Mordor. The museum itself has base isolators in the foundations. The isolator bearings are made from rubber and steel layers with lead core. According to Wikipedia, a technology pioneered in New Zealand in the 1970s. Having experienced a few quakes in the museum, they definitely slow and dissipate energy, but almost prolong the shaking, so we still design mounts and support objects with earthquakes in mind, especially when lending objects to other institutions around New Zealand or when displaying exhibitions from overseas. Te Papa was founded on the principles of biculturalism in recognition of the founding document of the country, the Treaty of Waitangi. As a living document today, it still guides the relationship between tangata whenua, people of the land, which the indigenous Māori, and tangata tiriti, people of the treaty. And this is important to recognise in the context of Rolf Houtere and his works. Houtere was one of the first Indigenous artists to bridge the art world between Māori and European practices in the modernist era. The renowned New Zealand art historian Jonathan Mani-Fioki said, "Houtere is at the forefront of mainstream New Zealand art history, but he is also an artist who stood outside New Zealand art history, both as a Māori and as one of the most cosmopolitan, sophisticated international artists New Zealand has ever produced." Te Papa plays a very important role as kaitiaki, its guardianship in terms of his legacy. The Black Phoenix work is so seminal, we have a responsibility to make sure we're contributing to the scholarship around it, especially by providing it to other institutions. The origins of the Black Phoenix began on the 4th of October 1984 in a small South Pacific boatyard in Carries Bay, Dunedin, located in the South Island, when the 50-foot wooden fishing trawler, the Poitrel, was caught in a blaze. The fire was near Houtere's studio, and apparently when he wandered down to investigate, a vision began to emerge, and he negotiated the purchase of her charred remains from the shipyard owner, Miller and Tunnage. Houtere was later quoted about this work. "It's called Black Phoenix because Miller and Tunnage are going to rebuild. Ka hinga atu he te tikura, ara mai he te tikura. When the fern frond dies, another takes its place, like the phoenix, like Miller and Tunnage. It's a really complex sculpture. Just the words charred and salvaged gives you some indication of the fragility and friability of the material the Hautere brought into this beautiful work, which speaks to the concepts of rebirth, regeneration, and reinvention, that whole idea of the phoenix rising from the ashes. Ralph Hautere passed away in 2013, and so a retrospective exhibition, Atete, to Resist, was formulated by two galleries in the South Island, Christchurch and Dunedin. So just to provide some context, I'll play a quick show reel from the Christchurch Art Gallery. Hautere went on a scholarship at the age of 30 in 1961 to study at the London Central School of Art and Design, where he merged his own cultural roots into new forms of painting and sculpture. He took the time to soak up exhibitions in galleries and museums, encountering and being inspired by the darkness of Rembrandt and Goya, engaging in the modernist movement with the likes of Mark Rothko. He saw how spiritualism and abstraction could combine. So with his return to New Zealand, his own black painting style began to emerge, with the Black Phoenix sculpture the culmination of those ideas. And so while the Black Phoenix has been displayed a few times since its creation, the COVID pandemic created an opportunity for Te Papa staff to undertake a full collection care project, looking at the storage, transit, and installation of the work. The body of the Black Phoenix is actually comprised of two parts: 800 pounds for the bow, 1,000 pounds for the prow section that are stacked together. 51 planks of timber lean up against the wall and lie across the floor. When the work was pulled out of storage, we could see that it had not been properly supported since the late 1980s. The bow section was on its back and the charred surfaces were badly exposed. At Te Papa, when we get together at the start of projects, we usually begin with a karakia, a prayer, and waiata, song, to unify those who are working with the collection object or taonga, treasure. This is part of what we call tikanga, traditional values and customs. A lot of Māori and Pacific collection is deemed to be living objects, and this can even influence how we do mounts, such as if a figure is carved into an object, making sure the mount isn't strangling the neck or gripping the groin. Some objects may even need to be easily removed from mounts if they are required for ceremonial roles. So here we are on the first day looking at the lower bow section, which is rather unceremoniously being stropped down to a pallet, causing the edges to flare out and crack. The collection project soon took over the Conservation Objects Lab. As our objects conservator would say, we inhaled the boat, as literally over a couple of months, a fine black dust spread about the building as she did her best at consolidating loose parts, big cracks and splits in the timber. She identified areas that had been burnt from the fire and subsequent charring that Hautere had undertaken at his studio. She left the bird's nest that she found in the hull, perhaps indicating the beginning of the phoenix's rebirth. The practical challenges of moving around such large pieces was no easy feat, and all planks were subsequently repacked into nested trays with mylar slip layers over foam, with each tray containing its own Ziploc bag to collect fragments and dust to help estimate loss per transit and installation. But the first part of the puzzle was looking at the original mounting solution and how they installed it. That's 80s fashion aside. The old documentation illustrated wires lashed around the lower part of the Samson post. It's usually the strongest part of the boat, used for attaching mooring lines and anchors. A team of people would push the charred bow up against the wall while someone climbed into the hull to fix the wires back to the gallery wall. The top prow section was then balanced on top, and the upper part of the Samson post fed through the deck to lock into the lower section below. While it made sense for Hautere to cut through the old fishing boat, the Poitrel, through its waterline to make it into two manageable pieces, in a biblical kind of way, that he also cut through the Samson post meant the boat had also lost its strength. The main fixing point for the Samson post was well decayed, had an inch of play around a single half-inch bolt holding it down onto a knee. Essentially, once the prow section was placed on top, the boat was trying to pull itself apart at the single point. And I guess that's the juxtaposition of this work. The vessel on the dry at rest, but behind the scenes, the calculations suggest this is a ship at anchor in a howling 50-knot gale, such as the strain on the Samson post and gallery walls. And indeed, the review of the old installation documentation spoke about one gallery wall failing under the strain and concrete reinforcement having to be added. Along with the visible internal damage to the boat, it wasn't hard to imagine a point where future failure was likely. He taki nā ko iwi e rere ai te manu. Even the bird needs bones to fly. This came to me one night while lying on the floor of the conservation lab, with the bow still on its back. I was trying to picture the floor as the wall and extrapolate the myriad of angles and measurements required to make the bow section of Black Phoenix rise up. I guess as Mountmakers, our number one focus is to maintain the integrity of the artist's vision. It's not just the making we do, it's the conversations with curators and conservators to ensure we're all on board while we strive to keep mounts invisible, protect the artwork, make the install easy and safe. And indeed, when I proposed a new mount system, Te Papa curator Megan Tamati-Quinnell, who had met Ralph Hautere a number of times, told me that he loved mechanical engineering, had an obsession with cars, had even visited a Mercedes-Benz factory in Germany to source Mercedes-Benz black lacquer for his paintings. When it came time for the paint finish on the mounts, unfortunately my budget didn't extend quite so far. So along with the crate maker, we began the design process. The idea was to design a mount that would integrate with the transit crate, utilizing the crate as a tool to replicate the installation process that would also remove any unnecessary handling of the charred surface and make install much safer. So starting with CAD, as we all know, that's actually cardboard-aided design. I made up 4 brackets per section that would clamp around what is called the stringers, as these stringers were determined to be the most structurally sound part of Black Phoenix, being fastened to the ribs and hull planks themselves. And this gave me a reference point for the overall mount system. The first sketches gave me a sense of the internal space I had to contend with and how the mount might connect back to the wall. I knew it couldn't be fixed. The mount would require adjustment. I looked at different options. Brace checks, no. Slotted sliding segments. I decided on wall plates to clip onto and considered their spacing relative to any mounts and the space between the different parts of the boat. I questioned how the mount would interface with the crate. We also had to consider the loading, the moment around the base of the keel, and finally settled on braced cantilevered arms connected via a split batten approach to wall plates made from 3/8" steel with enough wall anchors to resist pull-out in a seismic event. But the eureka moment came when I integrated turnbuckles and lifting eyes to the main components, finally allowing for the internal spatial requirements and clearance for the Samson post when it was fed back through. So with enough measurements, it was workshop time, as the fabrication process became a dialogue of numbers and a dance between tolerance and precision. The brace cantilevered arms were made from 3x2" steel section, and these connected the turnbuckles to a lifting structure that connected to the stringer clamps. And that was really the main challenge. The 2 massive parts had to line up, project out at the exact same 8-degree angle, sit the whole structure tight to the wall as if the boat had just burst through, and finally connecting them together via a 5/8" kingpin that Hautere had embedded into the stem post with 0 margin for error. For the paint finish, we just had to settle for Mountmakers Black. You can see here the turnbuckle design, which allowed both bow and prow sections to be adjustable in all directions, tilting bow to stern and port to starboard. As the cantilevered arm stays still, the lifting cradle changes angle by pulling up or lowering down on each side. The moment of truth. We successfully flipped the old pallet up, and the Phoenix began to fly towards the new crate system, ready for its final fit-out. The prow section took a similar path but used M12 turnbuckles to deal with the extra 200-pound weight. For both sections, the turnbuckles had a 10-to-1 ratio of braking load to the mass of the boat, which was useful when lifting into place. The main consideration then was the rotation about the keel, and the braced arms and wall plates countered those rotational forces. So this is the lifting stage of the prow section off the old pallets. We designed a lifting bar that locked into the mount through an opening in the deck. We set up a mock install in one of the corridors that had enough space. The wall bracing formed part of the specifications and layout plan that was sent on to the galleries, so they could get an engineer to make sure everything was reinforced, signed off before we arrived. We lifted the bow section into place, which was a simple transfer to the crate to the wall, and then tested the prow section, discovering that the kingpin on the prow, that final crux move, was out of alignment with a corresponding hole in the bow. But with a few quick turns on the turnbuckles, it was with great satisfaction when it fit together perfectly. The crate maker driving the forklift, excuse his language, and hardly believed that it worked. But again, when installing at the two galleries, those fine adjustments on the turnbuckles that we could make really helped with the non-square walls and unlevel floors that we ultimately encountered. From there, the transit and installation process was relatively seamless. The final crate fit-outs were completed. This is Exhibit A, boat in a box. And the prow crate was nicknamed the Landship after the World War I tank. Its dimensions are 10 foot wide and 6.5 foot high and long. Here we have the final fitting out of the plank trays and stack for transit. Each tray weighed up to 200 pounds. The stack weighed over a ton, and there was actually 2 stacks. Here, arriving at the first venue, showing before and after transit with minimal charcoal loss, which meant we had a very, very happy crate maker. The bow mount structure had removable lifting eyes, so we could strap up with either a forklift or gantry rig. Moving the prow section probably was the most scary part, as although it was super stable, just the mass at height while guiding into final position has made us consider a future upgrade. Because you can see here just how tight it really fits together. And currently the only holding position was available through the small black square patch at the back left there. It's a remnant from some previous time. So perhaps in the future we've thought of clip-on outriggers, so may actually end up looking like a modern America's Cup foiling monohull. And just to give you a sense of scale, with all the trays laid out, here we are mid-install at Dunedin Public Art Gallery as we began to install the planks. My other Mountmaker colleague took care of the vertical planks. Again, the old documentation had talked about an earthquake in the 1980s at a Wellington gallery. Originally, small wooden blocks had been fastened to the back of the timbers, and these had been double-sided taped to the floor and wall. You can imagine how completely inadequate this was, and the planks had moved, but fortunately hadn't fallen. Many of these old blocks had split, so removing these and replacing them with D-ring J-hook system at the top and a hinge plate at the bottom was approved. The top D-ring mount proved to be tricky. It had to be down from the top where there was solid enough wood, as many had jagged and fragile tips. The timbers leaned back against the wall, forming a right-angled triangle. As we didn't have a high enough stud in our conservation lab, we had to form a horizontal jig stand to set the foot of each plank at the same apparent distance from the wall when they would finally be installed. The fittings also helped with being able to lift from the D-ring at the top during installation and help reduce the handling of the charred surface. With so much time with the work, we really came to admire Hotori's selection of timbers, as despite their jagged and crumbly exterior, the hardwood below, exposed as golden honey hues, is in such great condition the work should surely endure for a long time. And while Hotori was notoriously silent about his own work, some perspectives have emerged. When laid on the floor, the planks lead the viewer as if across the sun-glowing water to the upraised prow of the boat itself. The charred timbers stacked against the wall on either side of the prow resemble the ribs of a palisade surrounding a traditional pa or village. The colonial ship has crashed through. Perhaps the stripped-back sections of timber suggest the surviving heart. The name of Hotori's tribe, Te Opuri, can be translated as dark smoke. The story is told of ancestors who, when under attack from another tribe, torched their own pa to escape under the cover of the smoke. As Aotearoa New Zealand ventures into a post-colonial world, the ship and planks, together outstretched, become reborn as the mythical phoenix that has survived the fires of the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Callum. We have a couple of virtual questions. Back to the conservation. What was used to consolidate the charred sections?
That would be a really good question for Numalaborum, our conservator. But yeah, I do have some photos somewhere of her. She's injecting something. I wouldn't know what it was. There was a bit of cleaning as well that she did, getting rid of just surface dirt as opposed to charcoal. Yeah, I can't answer that, sorry.
So kind of a two-parter. Can you, or the internal structure of the mount is permanent in the piece now, correct?
It could be removed. Yeah.
Can you talk about how it's attached?
Yeah, so if I describe, the stringers are the long planks that run the length of the boat. And so there's 4 clamps on those stringers. They go back to a lifting structure, then you have the turnbuckles, and then you have the arms. So essentially the boat is floating kind of on the turnbuckles, so that whole section is adjustable. Yeah.
We have a virtual two-parter. Did the artist leave any directions for the mounting of this work, and was the old documentation created by the artist?
No, it wasn't. That was from some of the original installs that I managed to track down through the archives. He did leave some notes as to the arrangement of the planks, depending on the venue, because some of the planks of timber are close to 6 meters tall, so if the gallery couldn't have that kind of ceiling height, then they could be swapped out to the floor with shorter planks to the wall.
How was the work originally stored?
So as you saw, there was basically just put on some pallets to ship around. It had a kind of a loose kind of frame and some plastic sheeting over it. So yeah, it was really in need of some love. It had been in storage for quite some time. And then just these sporadic installs over the years where people had sort of just followed that kind of original sort of way of doing it. And anyone who I talked to who had worked on it told me it was an absolute nightmare. And just really dangerous too. So,
yeah. In the planks where the wooden blocks had been removed, were the original holes where you tried to reattach those hinges at the bottom?
Yeah, that's correct. So where the original holes, that's what we tried to do, because interventions like that are usually a big no-no. But it was deemed, in terms of the earthquake kind of risk for them falling, that we actually had to do something. And so there was also one previous install. I did come across some notes that someone had made some actual clamp mounts to go around the timbers, and that was when Rolf Hoteri was still alive. When he came to view the work, he completely rejected them. He said, no, get rid of them. So we had to do something that was behind them and keep it as minimal as possible.
The D-rings, were those also already placed, or?
No, so the D-rings was where we could, where there were the old wooden blocks, we'd put them in the same place. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Beautiful, Colin. Okay. So our next presenter will be Pierre-Luc Brulliet, Mountmaker, Annie Gauthier, Exhibition and Internal Relationship Director for the MNBAQ Museum, Quebec, Canada, Quebec City. And the title is From Nature to Display, The Fragile Balance in Manassi Akpalapik's Work.
Hi, everyone. We'll be starting with a short video.
In my culture, we always depend on the things that we can create to survive. You have to be creative in order to survive in the environment like the Arctic. When we talk about someone carving, we refer them as sanangwakto, which means pretending to work. So I guess I've been pretending for about 45 years. I was born in a little outpost camp about 30 miles away from Arctic Bay, in a tent in August. No hospital, no doctors. We lived in a nomadic way, traveled by dog team, lived in igloos, and lived in huts. I think my art has saved me. It was there even when I hit the bottom. It was there. It was there to bring me back up. You don't have to be a prisoner of that alcoholism. I have to constantly think about the legends and what the people used to do. We have no choice but to be more creative in order to keep that alive. That helps me to understand who I am, where I come from. I'm always living in that era through my art.
So let's do a presentation about this Manassi Akpalapik show we had at the museum. I would like to dedicate this presentation to the artists. We love working with the artists actually at the museum, and especially Manassi, when he came to Quebec City, was so generous with us to explain his process, artistic process, but also where he's from, and was very generous with all his experience. I would like also to take the opportunity to thank the Brousseau family for the donation of Manassi's work, but also Inuit art to the museum. So the presentation will be split in four different areas. We'll start with the origin of Manassi's work, the exhibition project, the mount making material, and 5 case studies Pierre-Luc will go through. So let's start by this beautiful picture just to locate where Arctic Bay is in Nunavut, north of Canada, where actually Manassi was born in August 1955. He was, I have difficulties to find my text, sorry. His art is inspired by the heritage of his ancestor and by the deeply respectful relationship between Inuit and animals. He aims to build bridges between his own experience, like events of his life, and his culture. Manassi's life was filled with love, but also with very difficult chapters. For example, like many teenagers at that time, Manassi was sent to a residential school in Iqaluit, far from his family and community. There, he was forbidden to speak his language and to explore or even mention his culture. Manassi is an example of success. When we look at all of his career as an artist, he's a role model and a source of inspiration for the younger generation. And for all of us, really. So this is an example when he goes back to Arctic Bay. He goes to dig to find some whale bones. And like he says, he refers to it as the cycle of life, where he would actually take back the bone to continue the life of the animal. And like he's saying by himself, like he looks at the bone and it's the bone dictating the work he will actually be doing with it.
Hi, everyone. So since Manassi is literally carving some raw pieces of natures, it came up with a few preventive conservation issues. Because he is working on whale bones that he found out on the beach, there's remaining some sands and debris inside the works, and the porous material, it is very friable. So at heavy handling, we need to be very careful because there's always inherent loss of parts. And even when the works are in display inside showcase, we always notice that there are still sands falling apart from the object all along the path of the exhibition.
The exhibition, I would say that it's the very first time we actually dedicate a solo exhibition to an Inuit artist. And I don't say that because I'm proud. I think we should have been doing this for several years. We're actually collecting Inuit art. We have a huge collection. We've been doing research on it, but most of the time it was showcase in group shows. So fortunately, we're improving on that part. So Inuit Universe is curated by Daniel Drouin, who dedicated 15 years of research on our collection at the Musée throughout his career. This exhibition presents 40 sculptures made from 1997 to 2003 that talks about life, but also its meaning, time passing by, memory, fear, to name a few of the thematics of the exhibition. All the pieces are from the collection of Raymond Brousseau, the great supporter of the artist, and ran for almost 2 years. You can see the date. It's up since June 2021, and is closing next January. So for 2 years, we needed rugged mount making. So let's see a couple of the material.
Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to introduce a few material I use during the whole preparation of the mounts for this exhibition. Our very first approach was to make some epoxy cast interface, which helps with many different sculptures that are mostly one-part sculptures that have uneven surface in the footprint area. So as epoxy cast interfaces are a very simple way just to straighten up the balance of the object and make sure that they are safe on display. For the whole project, I used the same kind of epoxy, which was Quickwood epoxy putty. It's a very easy to work with, since it's a two-component into a single stick. So this product been recommended to me, sorry, after making a small workshop with a conservator at the Centre de Conservation du Québec, which are mostly our reference for our museums in Quebec City. Here are a few observed precautions when casting an interface. First of all, I always wrap the full object with the Dartek layer, making sure that not anything can go on the object. After the curing process of the epoxy, I remove the Dartek layer and then I go for a barrier in between the object and the mount. In some cases, I use paraloid B72 as a barrier, that I am not using it as an adhesive, but just as the barrier to seal up the epoxy cast interface. And in some other times, a padding was needed. When the epoxy interfaces are not sufficient to offer good support for the object, I needed to design and build some metal armatures. For the whole project, I used 3 different kind of metals, which are pretty common in mount making, such as brass for its ease to work, steel when I needed a stronger support, and also stainless steel 316 when I needed to make some internal parts like replacing dowels and stuff like that. Here comes, I'm just making a small part with the choice of finish, which is a curatorial approach. The curator decided to go for camouflage the mounts for the whole exhibition. And there's a quite clear reason for that, since Menacee is oftenly working with objects that are into precarious balance. And this precarious balance is kind of the magic spot of balance of works. And this is a great part of the visual experience that we make of his works. So an obvious mount would kind of break a part of that magic that emanated from the work. For all the camouflage on the mounts, I used Laropol A81 base paint, which is a painting that is pretty common in conservation treatments, especially for metal surface. First, I was working with just a solution of Laropol and pigments. So Laropol is a resin that you can just dissolve in very mild solvent like ethanol, and you can increase or decrease the percentage of resin that you put in your mixture. And this will, with this feature, you can adapt the gloss finish of your painting. I have also used Gemblin conservation colors, which are quite the same mixture, but through an industrial manufacturing process, these pan sets reach a very high level of concentration of pigments, so which results into a very matte finish. Since one of the main feature and advantage of this paint is that since it's only solvent and resin with pigments, it dries super fast. It's just once the solvent is evaporate, the paint is totally dry and there's no off-gassing period after that, since the solvent is completely gone. In mount making, we don't have many choices of padding, but we still have some, like felt, sweated polyethylene, string tubing, or Volara. In that case, I chose to work with Vollara for many features, but the main feature that was interesting me was the vibration dampening. I wished that this could help into the loss of fragments and sands while the works were on display after all the mount making process. So this was my gamble with this choice.
So let's go now in the 5 case studies to go and see all the vocabulary you've been developing to do this, this exhibition. So we'll start with the shaman and his community in connection with Universe, made in 2000. You can see this picture was taken before Pierre-Luc did the mount, so the central figure, the face in the middle is crooked, couldn't stand straight anymore. So I'll be reading a little bit of the traditional culture, the meaning of the shaman. The shaman had the power to heal and serve as a link between humans, animals, and natural elements. He was able to see the spirits of all living beings, to communicate with them, and in certain situations, to calm them.
Yeah, so let's take a closer view on this work. This is a 3-part assembly, and like most of the assembly of Manassi, it's made with dowel, which are made also with organic materials such as caribou antler. So we see that the problem is in the connection between the base and the whalebone and the upper part, which is the head. So when you have a look closer, you see that there's some masking tapes that are coming out of the insertion hole. And so we needed to take a closer view at that by dismantling this connection. Also, the work itself is pretty unstable because of the head is crooked. All the parts tend to move really easily. So we decided to cast an interface between the base of the sculpture and the head. But first of all, we needed to go find what was the compensation material that was used for the dowel insertion. We found out that it was made of cardboard and masking tape, and compression and all the stress that was into this area made that this material was no longer sufficient to make the head look straight. So I first started by locking the dowel in the right position with some balsa wood pieces. Then I trimmed it out and had a steel ring around the dowel. Then this steel ring is here to make sure that during the casting process of the epoxy interface, the interface wouldn't lock around the dowel. So here is the casting process, which is quite simple. Notice that the head is fully wrapped with a layer of Dartec. Since we are handling epoxy and some parts of the object at the same time during the casting process, it needed to be fully protected. Sorry. So we found out that the 3 parts of the object needed to be assembled together in order to make sure that the whole thing is well balanced and that the head is in the right position during the epoxy is curing. Here's the step of finishing the interface. I just needed to trim out the excess around the footprint of the head. And then after I sealed the whole epoxy with a Paraloid B72 solution. And after that, made a very simple faux finish just to make the mount a little less obvious. You can see here the process in 3 steps with the difference between where we started and where we finished.
Now is another example, actually, of a story Manassi had told Daniel Drouin, the curator, and the whole team. It's the Lumac legend, which is quite surprising. So this legend recounts the story of a young blind boy persecuted by his own mother, a widow called Lumac. When he succeeds in killing a bear that has attacked their home, the mother tells him that he actually had killed the dog. After having regained his sight with the help of the loons, the boy returns to the camp and sees the bear skin. Furious, he ties the harpoon line around his mother's waist and harpoons a whale, which drags Lumac out of the sea.
Yeah, so first of all, this is not a raw piece of meat. It's an alabaster stone. We can see a close-up view into the connection between the two parts of the sculpture. And this is obvious that the point of contact between the two pieces is very small, which is problematic in the conservation of the work, because at any sidely vibration or any shocks, some parts of the very friable whalebone part could break, and then it will occur into more difficult installation for the future. So in this case, I needed to combine an epoxy interface with the brass armatures. The brass armature is securing the base of the sculpture in place, and then the epoxy interface is here to improve the footprint area of the upper part. During the curing process of the epoxy, I started sculpting it in order to make the continuity of the whalebone, to make sure that the mount will be less obvious as possible. So here you can see the mount in place with the junction between the mount and the whalebone part.
So a man tormented by his memories, thinking of two women. I don't think I need to read any labels about that. This is universal theme.
Yeah, and of course, as the meaning of Manassi's sculpture are pretty close to their materiality, this object is in an extremely fragile balance. So this is a pretty scary sculpture to install without any mount, because when you put the upper part, which insert into a hole inside the head of the man, the sculpture, the upper part start tangling from left to right, and the bottom part is tangling back and forth. So this makes that this sculpture was particularly challenging. So first of all, I needed to secure the base of the sculpture. I went for small clips in order to secure it. You can see that the longer clips that go over the object has a very small addition of an epoxy interface to make sure that it will follow the complex contour of this area. And for the upper part, this was more challenging. Since I wanted to make sure that the upper part won't move inside the cavity, we decided with the curator to fill the hole completely to make sure that there's a maximum support to the upper part in a discrete way as possible. So I created this little epoxy interface that I sculpt and then paint to mimic the porous material. And this part is totally removable since it's just a drop fit inside the cavity in the head.
Another very powerful piece, fear of losing one's sculpture. culture, made in 2000. So after the Second World War, the federal authorities in Canada obliged Inuit to adopt the lifestyle of the southern populations, which involved giving up their nomadic life and becoming sedentary. Their traditional culture was systematically suppressed and Christianity imposed. In this work, the shaman is being split in two by the devastating effects on his community of the new way of life.
So the first issue with this work is that it was no longer standing on its own, unfortunately, because over the installation, the insertion hole was crumbling and getting larger and larger. So at this point, if you put all the parts together, the two parts of the head would slip and go really crooked. I first of all secured the two parts with ethophone blocks temporarily, and then I started to use some thin brass and paper in order to create some templates to go bend all my material inside my workshop. So here's the first fit test. Notice that the thickness of the brass didn't allow to perfectly follow the contour of the object, which was a problem since very small points of contact can make some breaks occur at any time during install or even during display. So I filled the gap between the brass armature and the object with epoxy. And then after I started to camouflage the mount. So, and here is a small quick tip just for the in-painting process. I am always leaving the Dartex layer around the object until the mount is pad. So this helps a lot since this nylon film, taking advantage of the transparency of the nylon film, I can replicate some details of the sculpture while looking through the temporary barriers. Here's the last test fit and the final display of the work.
That brings us to the last case study. So Talilayuk, the goddess of the sea. This work is one of the favorites of the visitor. It looks really light. It looks like it's swimming, but you'll see that it was quite a challenge. So in Inuit mythology, the legend of Talilayuk, or the Sedna, remains the best known, and her story has been passed down from generation to generation. The goddess, half woman, half fish, reigns over all animals of the sea. When she's angry, Talilayuk holds the animals in her hair, and only the intervention of the shaman can free them back.
So the first time we installed this work, like 10 years ago, without any mount, me and my colleague put the upper part on the caribou antler. And when we leave the object, it took like 10 seconds before it starts moving like this. And during this movement, we saw a loss of fragments, and the whole was crumbling with this. So the biggest issue with this work is to be able to have the right position during the install, which is quite fairly impossible without any guide for this. And over the installation, it was an evidence that once a day this work could no longer go on display without a mount. So we didn't want to reach that point. This is why we decided to make a mount in order to ensure the preventive conservation of the object, but also to guide the installation. So I first made a template made of cardboard, which I digitize and vectorize in order to send it to laser cut the outline of the object out of a, oh, it's correct. Out of an half-inch thick steel piece. After that, I just needed to weld and braze all the parts together. Notice on the last image that I just needed to mix brass and steel together with brazing in order to take advantage of the ease to bend of brass. During the templating process, a 2 millimeter clearance been observed in order to let some space to cast an epoxy interface between the mount and the object. This could help to follow the complex contour of the object perfectly, and also to make sure that the first fit test won't damage any part of the object. After that, that was literally a huge faux finish journey. I spent so many times on this mount that I didn't know at which point I should leave it, and I think that if I would have listening to me, I wouldn't be there with you, and I will be still painting this mount.
So,
thank you.
Yeah, we could say that that was one positive thing about COVID. We would never have been able to give Pierre-Luc that much time before an install of an exhibition to actually do this. I wanted to say that, you know, it's really a treat for me to be here with you at the Getty. Since yesterday I'm listening to all your experience. It's a very young practice for us in Quebec City. We're new to the business, let's say, and we're very grateful and proud of Pierre-Luc, who's alone doing this in our institution amongst the other technicians installing the exhibition or on the side of collection or art handler. So I just wanted to say that you're a very beautiful group of people and good community of practice, and I think, I hope at one point I'll be able to welcome you in Quebec City. We'll see. So. Let's finish by thanking the whole team who worked on the exhibition, of course. We'll take some questions. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
I can kick off the questions with a virtual question. For the last mount, because the epoxy is so fitted to the object, is it difficult to remove the object from the mount?
No, can you go back a bit? Why it comes? Yeah, just. Oh, that's great. Yeah, without the full finish, it's easier to understand. As you can see, this mount is a two-part. There's a full plate under the rock, and then after there's a small pin which is notched to receive the upper part of the mount. So during the install, we just put on the base of the mount, install the rock which come with the caribou antler, and then after that we put the upper part of the mount and then screw the two mechanical attachments you can see in the picture, and then after that we're just dropping the main figure on it.
We have another virtual question. When pairing your contoured brass pieces with the epoxy cast pieces, the fill, do they attach together as one piece, or do they remain in place by using pressure?
Yes, it's attaching pretty well as long as the mount is clean. In my case, I often just clean it with ethanol before casting.
Nice job, Pierre-Luc. I have a question over here. How closely did you work with Manassi on these objects with the mounts? Did you have to ask him permission or to do these things, or was he resistant or anything? Or?
For the work with Menacee, since Menacee is living far from Quebec, I needed to refer to the curator mostly. And we had, it was not a simple path to ask questions directly to Menacee. It was better working with the curator. And Annie, maybe you have a few inputs about that.
Yeah, actually, it was a very political action at the museum because of the acquisition process. But mainly what we learned out of this experience is that when he came with Annie's kid, well, they're married, his wife, they actually talked about all the pieces one by one, explaining the meaning of it and the link with his own life and history. And all of this was written down because, you know, like every museum, we're always asking ourselves from where we're talking about, what's our perspective, and who should be curating this, and how should we handle those stories, who should be actually writing the labels. And it was very important for us, like we had access to the artists for the content, and we realized how much we actually made him contribute to that part of the text. And he's an older artist. It was demanding also all that work to create the exhibition. And so when the Mount making arrived in the development of the project, he was aware of that after the fact or along the way, let's say. And he was super impressed, and then we realized that we cut him from a huge pleasure for him because his craftsmanship and all the you know, what he loves doing when he's doing sculpture, it's actually that. And he was so amazed with Pierre-Luc's work. He wanted to actually talk about this. And then we thought, okay, that's again us going through a process and blocking something happening. So I think that what we learned from this is that when artists are coming to the institution to develop an exhibition, it's not just for content-wise, we should be doing those sessions of work, but actually bring people from all different section directions and so forth, and to actually access the magic, because, you know, there's nothing like having the artist talking about its art. So unfortunately in that process, Pierre-Luc didn't work closely, but it's not because we didn't want it or something like that. Yeah.
Beautiful job.
With some of those epoxy pieces where you're creating a mold inside of those like kind of bone structures, because of how delicate it was, the epoxy that I've worked with before feels kind of stiff. Was there any worry about potentially damaging those structures as you're trying to fit those in there?
You mean to the interface to get stuck in the cavity? Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I was really worried about that. I carefully looked if there was undercut inside the cavity. There was indeed. So I just filled them with some little food wrap, just making some small parts and then filling it. And also, the Dartek layer is making also a little loose between the interface and the object. And also, Quickwood has a fast curing process, not like epoxy sculpt, which has a slower curing process. So this means that the interface will shrink a little bit more during the curing process. So all these factors kind of help to remove the piece.
So if the curing process is faster, I'm just wondering how much time you had to like sculpt that one piece.
Which one? This one?
Sorry, the one where you kind of mimicked the bone. Might have been.
Oh yeah. This one went a bit faster, but I really lost the time count into this project since I worked on it with always 3 objects on the bench. Because of the curing process, I've been always like mixing a batch of epoxy, making 3 mounts at the same time. But for the making the texture, it went during the curing process, so it took less than 20 minutes. And notice also that the epoxy I'm using is really close to the color of the whalebone. So for the full finished part, it went pretty well. It wasn't that long. The preparation was longer than making the mount itself.
Thank you.
Hi, I had a question regarding potential storing. I understand that whalebone becomes more fragile the drier it gets. Do you have any concerns for the de-insulation or storage of this if it does have to move or just be stored? What are your plans for that?
Do you mean about the atmosphere condition or more about the packing for storage?
I'm curious about everything.
Everything, okay. I have colleagues that works in the collection department, which will make all the storage mounts. For the deinstallation, I have no worries since I didn't use any adhesive on any parts of during the mount making process, so everything is easily removable. And most of the time for the closer fits on object with metal armatures, I always made some mechanical connection, which are mostly in strategic points that makes it easy to remove it safely. But I'm more worried about where I'm gonna put all these mounts after. Since they will not be in the same location as the object, of course.
It's all good. So that was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I've been watching you from afar on Instagram for years, and just watching the evolution of Pierre-Luc has been spectacular. Really, it's incredible. I think we're going to take a break. Doesn't seem like we should. We just got rolling, but I think we got coffee and tea out there and snacks. And they'll probably get gross if we don't eat them. So, hey everybody, welcome back. So we'll get on to our next presenter. So it is Jamie Haskell. Needs probably no introduction. Yeah, Jamie Haskell. There you go. And it's mount making in the mind's eye.
Oh my, it's finally me. Thanks for all you for coming. This is really just been an amazing thing. I mean, I've been to all but one of the Mount Making Forums, and this one is stunning. You did a great job, guys. All right. So we've been getting just such an amazing amount of information and sharing of tools and techniques, and just the insane amount of creativity we've been seeing here today and yesterday. And so I want to talk about a tool that we may not even really think about how we use, but that we're using all the time. And that's our mind's eye. And this is just kind of, I've been thinking about this a whole bunch over the past year or so, and I decided this was something that I really wanted to share with you. So when you look at building a mount, what do? How do you start? You look at the object, look at the condition report, look at the exhibit design drawings, and talk with the curator, the designer. We start with these kind of perfunctory things, but then what do you get? Do you get a little picture of what you want to do to start? What I really want to know is, what do you see in your mind's eye? What's that thing that's there? And with that question asked, I kind of want to give you a little background on why I've kind of gone in this direction. So, a friend of mine, Elena, is a guitar player and really interesting person. And one day she was just talking and said, people tell me to envision things, and I don't see anything when you say that. Somebody says, envision an apple. I don't get that. And she referred to this as a condition, as aphantasia, the inability to envision. So when somebody says envision an apple, she sees this. Not this. Or this. I mean, when I think of envision an apple, I'm thinking of a Red Delicious, well, not very often a Red Delicious, actually, but with the little striations and the bumps at the bottom, or an Ashmead's kernel. There's a better example. A nice russeted green apple with a nice white flesh inside. I really think about apples. I grow apples. Or this. I was a botanist before I was a museum worker. In fact, my first job was at the Field Museum of Natural History, mounting pressed plant specimens because I was studying botany. Or this. I mean, and doesn't this come with a little whiff of cinnamon for you? Our mind's eye is actually way more than visual. It's a very large place in a lot of ways. So I got thinking about all of this and started reaching back into it and trying to figure out how this is. And the first part of that is realizing how differently we each envision, how we each kind of think differently, and it's why we all are producing such incredibly creative solutions to these sorts of things. So I, for one, have an extremely detailed visual mind's eye. I can do basically a 3D CAD rotation in my head. I'm looking at, which way do I want things to be built? Where's my center of gravity? Trying to envision all of that. Different formats of how, if I did it this way, or I could hold it this way. So I also have an aural mind's eye. I'm a musician. I'm a banjo player. Well, but I'll have tunes pop up, and I'll start to whistle them. And if I do that, I can actually pull out the fiddle, which isn't my primary instrument. Pretty soon, I can be playing it pretty well, which drives Betsy, my wife, crazy because she is a fiddler and she has to work very hard to put a tune to her fiddle. So as I went and started looking into this, I ran across people like Temple Grandin And many of you may know Temple Grandin, and she's an autistic person who has she's written huge amounts on how she sees in pictures, how she thinks in pictures, and how that allows her to figure out what animals see and feel. And she designs livestock restraints or livestock systems and kind of all sorts of stuff, but she's a fascinating speaker. And the autism gives her very distinct abilities because this seeing in pictures sends her into other areas of thinking. People with abilities such as dyslexia also have profound effects, that has profound effects on how we see. So some examples, when I worked at the Burke Museum years ago, I was training a guy by the name of Michael Lang, and he was severely dyslexic. And he'd come to me and he'd say, okay, so Jamie, I want to do this and this and this. And I'm like, Michael, you can't do that. You can't, well, holy smokes, you can do that. And I had to literally turn myself upside down to see the logic path that he had, because I can't think like that. And they worked. They were bizarre from my mind, but they did work. And then I'm going to call out Sakina, who is here in the audience, who's came and took one of my workshops a month or so ago. And she talked about her dyslexia and how her grandmother helped her realize it was her superpower, how she could disassemble and assemble things in her mind. And it augments her CAD and CNC work. And it's just been great seeing you here. So my friend Richard is a guitar player, but he's an ethnomusicologist, an extremely learned musician. So when he's playing, he said, he actually sees the musical staff, the notation going by in his head. He's playing from sheet music, except the sheet music is in his head. And I realized when I talked with him that what we see in our mind's eye is all about the tools that we know how to use, and that you can't really envision something that you're not familiar with. So as we develop our mind's eye, it's about developing all our tool using. So one of the books that I found was this, Engineering in the Mind's Eye, and this was written in the early 90s. And Eugene Ferguson talks about how engineering is this conceptual thing as much as it is an analytical practice, and went on, and it was really at the beginning of the time when computers were truly being used in engineering to the detriment, he felt, of the use of the mind's eye. And so he wrote this. A lot of it's really fascinating history of engineering, but he gets into this at the end. And this was one of his quotes about how until the 60s, a student was asked to go and see shops, see processes, so they'd get an intrinsic feel of how materials work, how processes work, and how they don't work. And we've all seen that in drawings done by people that don't actually do work, and that, or I shouldn't say don't do work, don't do the manufacturing. And we have to try to manufacture to a concept that doesn't have materials and processes as part of its generation. And he also talks about in the 80s how the engineering curriculum shifted very much into the analytical from sensual knowledge, and how that seems so much less relevant. He talks about Alan Colquhoun, I guess, but who argues that no matter how rigorous the laws of science are applied to the solution of a design problem. The designer still has to have a mental picture, and I firmly believe this. And that scientific laws are not found in nature, they're constructs of the mind. And one of the things I love about what we do is that we use our minds so much in this. Oliver Sacks is another one. He approached the mind's eye from the point of view of losing one's sight and how to do that. And he talks about Zoltan Torrey, who was a Hungarian psychologist who was blinded in an accident and worked to develop a finer and finer mind's eye. And I think this is the example of where he worked things out so well that he went up on his roof and he replaced his gutters. He's totally blind. His neighbors thought he was crazy, especially since he was doing it at night. But of course, it didn't matter that he was doing it at night because he was blind. It's been really fun doing the research for this because, oh my God, I've seen things that's like, wow, that's really quite something. And yes, that is what the book looks like. It's just this really weird cover. You're going, oh my God. But he also talks about August Kekule, who in 1855 was riding along, and he was a chemist, and he was thinking about the structure of molecules, and he came to this vision in his mind's eye of the structure of the benzene ring and how the bonds worked. And he was right, and it changed the entire way that chemistry is depicted and figured out. And as part of trying to work on this, I've talked to a couple of chemists when I was at the WAC meeting a couple of weeks ago, trying to see if they envisioned structure and if it helped them figure out how to put multiple things together. So it's just a fascinating thing. But I love how he says that to Kekule, that this was visually as imaginable as the lines of force around a magnet were for Faraday. And with all these magnetic talks that we've been having, I've been thinking a lot about that because Gwen Spicer's book, which was cited, is something that you all need, and she goes into great detail on the lines of force and all the magnetic attractions that are part of that. So where does this lead to in reference to mount making? So for me, the analysis of the problem at hand, I'll try to take into account all these things that I've been gathering, all this information, looking at it and looking at the object and holding it and looking at surfaces and trying to figure out weight and all of this stuff and thinking about what the visual outcome is that we want. And yeah, it'll have impressions of weight and balance, the overall structure and condition of the surfaces, force vectors, thinking about seismic stabilization. If we start shaking, what is this thing going to do? I need a little bit more capture over here because there's some weight that is going to be thrown that direction. So really trying to go through it, and I'm using, again, my mind's eye to go and try to figure out some of the alternatives that I could use. I could do it like this, or I could do it like that. So for a quick illustration, this is a piece that I just worked on for the Fry Art Museum in Seattle. It's a trefoil lens, and those are 3 ground, I think they were, ground and polished glass balls. Those are about 2 inches a piece. And then they've been joined here by more hot glass, and it's not even, it's irregular, and so there's choosing what side is up and this and that. And the museum it's more of a prop than an actual object, but they're putting it into an exhibit, and people are going to look through it. It is a lens, and they wanted it held, and they wanted it kind of a steampunk look. So with that in mind, I start going through, and when I hit something, I'll start sketching. but the mind's eye is where the sketch is coming from. And so, at the beginning, I was thinking, steampunk, and here are kind of claw forms. I rarely make a mount that's artistic, that actually is going to show itself, but this was part of the deal. And so I was thinking of the piano stool claw feet where it's a talon grasping a glass ball and stuff, and so I went down that road for a little while and where the balance point was. But as it went on, it was like, no, I wanted a little plainer than that. And so then as I developed it further, then I went to better drawings. And this is especially as I developed the idea, I'm doing a drawing that I can now communicate the idea to somebody else. I mean, usually the drawings are for my use, and my drawings are not necessarily pretty until I really start doing something like this. On this mount, I went to a hexagonal brass stock and and bored a hole here. In the end of this piece, there's a pin coming out of that, and that's a set screw that's securing those, because so this is a solid that's supporting all the weight, and those are two removable pieces that are allowing you to actually install the piece. And so that is the back view of it once it was done, and with a black patina, chemical patina on it. And it's all that way, all along the path. My mind's eye is still, working on, oh, it's like that. Now how do I do it? And, kind of close my eyes and kind of look off into the distance and try to think about, oh, I could do that. I could go a little more that way, or I need to bend it there. And so I say, a mount maker staring off into space is not doing something. They're fully engaged usually in the project at hand. And in the end, it was a wonderful mount. And so that's it from the front, and I really liked how it turned out. So in thinking about this, I was concluding, well, how do we actually work with our mind's eye? Because I think we can develop it. I think we can take this ability that we innately have, or I hope innately have. I mean, obviously Elena doesn't have it, and I've had other people that say, oh no, I can't think in 3D. And I actually, at the start of my workshops, I sometimes ask, okay, do you feel you can think in 3D, because you're going to have to do it in this. So all that spatial relation stuff. But we can develop by really observing. And this goes back to Ferguson's whole thing of, watching processes, watching materials, exercising how do materials work, and just coming to things like this. I mean, I've learned so much here in these past 2 days. It's just been stunning. And I'm going to put a lot of those into that storehouse of knowledge for my mind's eye. And then practicing seeing. In the Oliver Sacks book, he talks about people who have lost their sight and who have gone and consciously worked to see in greater and greater detail, and really, rotate things in your mind. I found that one of the things I thought, well, can I envision the interior space that is in the visual shadow? It's not something that I can actually see, but, I can stick a finger in. I was thinking of the interior cavity of a skull. One of the guys at one of my recent workshops brought a bear skull. He was with the Museum of the North in Fairbanks. And you've got the foramen magnum, and you can inevitably go in there, but what does that look like? Can you envision a little bit of, okay, well, there's that much space, there's, you know, some things that are in there. Of course, it isn't exact, but it's something we can use. And then sometimes I've just let my mind wander back to projects I've had and go, let's see, now how did I do that? And could I have done that differently? What would I think of now? So it's just, I want to challenge you to start looking at your mind's eye in a conscious way. And this is just the beginning of a conversation about this. I think it's been funny because I've been talking about this. People are going, oh, well, I do this, and I do this. And it keeps popping up again and again, even if this is not something I've brought up. It's like, well, I was envisioning this. And it's like, see, there it is. This is what I'm going to be talking about. So I encourage you to think about it and expand on all of this and have fun with it. And I want to thank everybody who's come, and, you know, BJ and Elizabeth, you've been two main points, but I know the entire Getty crew and the Getty for allowing us to be here. What a great thing. And then Jack Mackey and the Mountmakers at Seattle Art Museum, where I really got started, and BJ was part of that crew. It was just an amazing place to start. And then obviously my dear wife, Betsy, and my dog, Barlow, who have listened to me rattling on about this again and again. Thank you all.
I think I'm not on, Paul. There we go. Thanks, Jamie. You've given me some new books to add to my list. I was also wondering if you would be willing to email me that list of the books you reference, and then I can email it out to everybody.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, thanks.
This is not a question. It's just I'm incredibly grateful that you talked about this, because I think you can't put enough emphasis on the way that our brains and our minds are sort of wired to figure this out. And I think that anybody that does this for a living, it's just incredibly special. I mean, and everybody finds a different path to their best practice. And I don't think we spend enough time talking about it. So thank you for the thoughtful presentation.
You're welcome. It is one of those things that it's just like, gee, I use this all the time. It is actually something. It is a tool. What am I doing with this? How do I think about this? So, yeah, it's just been a really kind of fun thing to noodle around with.
Thank you. I want to second that thought. It really is a creative process, and I don't think that maybe the people that we work with sometimes allow us that time to just be still and think about how we're going to get started. So it really is in the sense of like being a Renaissance person and knowing how to do all these different things and putting all that together in a creative way. And this is more of like a philosophical conversation, really. I mean, we can spend hours talking about it. So thank you for talking today.
You're welcome.
I don't have a question either, Jamie, but I just want to thank you for being a friend and for helping for a long time that we've worked together, and for mentioning your dog.
Barlow's an important part of all this. And there are pictures if anybody wants to see them. Because they won't allow me to bring him here. He's in Pasadena right now with Betsy.
So Jamie, the Mounties at the Alaska State Museum, thank you for all you gave them. It's disembodied, so I'm not sure what the context is.
I'm sorry, say that again?
The Mounties at the Alaska State Museum, thank you for all you gave us.
Oh.
That's what it says. I thought you might know what it means.
Okay, that was, so the Alaska State Museum was one of probably the finest project I've ever been involved in, and if you ever have a chance to go to Juneau, go see the Alaska State Museum. But I'm sure that's probably Aaron Elmore and Jackie Manning and folks like that that are watching up there.
Thank you, Jamie, for a wonderful story. I'm just curious because you said you're also a musician. Myself, I also play instruments, but I wonder, can you read musical sheets or are you just improvising as myself? Because I've never mastered reading music, and I don't know, it's a strange thing about how your mind works, but I'm very able to remember texts, lyrics, music, but I can't read musical sheets. So I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm. I did learn to read. I originally, my music was for voice, and I was able to sight read music, sheet music for voice. I've never really worked to translate sheet music for instrument, and especially playing old-time banjo. Sheet music is not really part of that. So the tunes are in my head in that.
Hi, Jamie. So, in the day-to-day and like juggling multiple projects, lots of things going on, my mind's eye is kind of a cluttered, messy place. So I'm wondering, like, what do you do to focus in on that clear sketch, the one that came after the rough one with the claws, and like clear out the sketchy bits and focus in on that clear image?
That's a good question, because there are those times when the mind's eye is really cloudy and you're just kind of going, what the heck am I going to do with this? And somehow, it's that time of just mulling it over and maybe going away from it and coming back to that problem. And maybe it's 3 a.m. is often when, something says, oh, by the way, this. Say, oh, wow, okay. And I have to get up and write it down because there is that thing. And I know from far too much experience that little concept may very well be gone if I try to get back to sleep and I wake up in the morning and go, well, now I had it, but I don't know where it went. So, yeah.
So my question is the most important question. When is the next class?
There are 4 workshops that have just been published on my website. The next one is beginning of December, and the next one is beginning of January, then end of January and into February, and end of February into March. It's nice having a shill in the audience.
I just wanted to thank you again for that. I've been lucky enough to work in a workshop with a lot of other mount makers, and it really, if you talk to anyone else about a mount, you'll come up with 10 different ideas of how to make it, and I've been so grateful to have the opportunity to do that in like having other people around me to talk to about it. What people probably noticed from my talk is I'm one of the few mount makers who's not an artist. Do you have any tips and tricks on how to convey the mind's eye to curators without being able to draw a beautiful picture like you can?
It's hard. And that's where working on your sketching actually is something you kind of have to do. Because I am not an artist in terms of doing, really, clear concept drawing. but I did have to work on a project where I needed to actually put in drawings for engineering review. And so I got much better at using gridded paper and using squares and circle templates and all of those things. And you can do it. It just takes practice like everything else.
I think it's the concept I find hard to convey. I can do the engineering once I've got the time to do it, but when you're trying to throw 10 ideas at a curator.
You don't ever throw 10 ideas at a curator. You give them one.
Speaking of gridded paper and rulers, what is the brand of gridded sketch pad you use and the rulers?
Oh, I actually like the Veritas, the Lee Valley gridded, it's an 8.5 by 11 size spiral bound sketch pad. And it's got scales on both X and Y axis, and it's, I think, a 1/4 inch grid. And that's my favorite one to work with. And then for rulers, I've got such a variety of everything from metal rulers to, I've got a centering ruler that I use a lot. That's a little 6-inch centering ruler that I got from Stuart McDonald Manufacturing, which is a company that sells musical instrument parts, guitar parts and banjo parts and building stuff. Thank you all.
That was excellent, Jamie. Excellent. I myself am dyslexic, so I understand thinking in different ways. But I think we have a treat for you all. Our next presentation is Laura McClure, Mountmaker of the Smithsonian National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., and Jen Simons, partner of Bridget Mountmaking, Baltimore, Maryland. And the presentation is Between Two Carts.
Bring me the carts.
Hello. How are you, Laura?
Hi, I'm fine. How are you? Oh, wait, I'm not fine. I have COVID.
So just to sort of give you a little thing, this is not so much a presentation as it's just a conversation. I am a contract mount maker, and Laura is a staff mount maker at American History. And we are fortunate enough to get to work with each other all the time. But we kind of want to start a dialogue about what it's like to be a contractor versus being a staff mount maker.
That's me.
So one of the things we actually wanted to do, if you wouldn't mind, I would love to see a show of hands first, who is a staff mount maker, if you wouldn't mind. And then who's the contract mount makers. So we are tiny, there's not a lot of us. So just to sort of give you, I'll give you some of my background, and then Laura can give you some of her background. And if it gets hot, I can fan myself with Laura's face.
Yes, please.
But my background is I started out as, well, I started welding when I was 14. I studied sculpture at the Kansas City Art Institute. Unfortunately, I ran out of money, so I had to get a job, and I was certified when I was 18, 19. And so I've worked as a structural welder, a rigger, a fine art rigger, and a preparator, and a mount maker, but always sort of in for profit. And I love all of the skills that I have, but it's so great to get to collaborate with somebody like Laura.
Thank you. And I feel the exact same way. I have been a mount maker at the National Museum of American History for about 12 years, and I've been working at the museum for about 21 years. So, and I've worked on all kinds of things. My background is in international affairs with a focus on Asian religions. So, of course, that's how I ended up being a mount maker. And, just listening to Jamie's talk makes me realize, oh, I too have dyslexia, and maybe I'm built for this job. So I'm so lucky to get to work with wonderful contract mount makers like Jen. So let's talk about it.
So we recently finished a massive installation at American History, and Laura and I have actually done quite a few really large projects together over the last 10 years at least. And one of the things that's really interesting is we generally come in, my company, Bridge and Mount Making, generally comes into a project when there is either highly complicated objects or there is a volume that can't be handled by the staff mount maker. And one of the things as a contractor is we do deal in volume. And so we have to be really specific about how we estimate jobs, what our time frame is going to be, what our cost is, because we also have to be competitive. So we have to be proficient in everything that we do, creative, correct, and on time, if not early, which is kind of problematic. But having support at the museum with someone like Laura makes it it makes the process a lot smoother and frankly, a lot more fun. But one of the ways that we do that is we have to, because we don't have constant access to the objects, we have to template. So we go in, we template the objects, we go away, we make blanks, come back for a fitting, go away again, final fitting, and then going into installation. But the templating is something that, if you want to talk about
it's not something everyone can do. So as an in-house mount maker, I don't typically template. I have access to the artifacts, and so I'm able to work directly with the object. And so it's a different process. It's not better or worse. And not necessarily faster or slower. It's just different.
It's just different.
And I think that I can template in a pinch, but I see the templating that Jen does, and it's just incredible. Because you have to have all of that detail for when you're working off-site. It's an incredible set of skills.
So one of the things that we also, to make this a little bit different, sorry, I can also scream, which is usually how I talk. My husband says that I'm the loudest human being in the smallest house in the world. But we also want you guys to want to participate as we sort of go through this. So it's completely interactive. We're just going to sit up here and talk. But if you have questions or something to sort of add or share, we would greatly appreciate it. One thing I actually wanted to add, and I wanted to say it in the beginning, I don't know how people come to be mount makers. I just know that when I was a child, I was a prolific toucher in the museums, and I have been kicked out of many institutions. And my favorite part of my job is that I get to touch literally everything and anything that I want to. And so having said that, one of the most fun things when Laura and I get to work together is she actually gets to work with some of the coolest objects, the funnest objects, if that's a word. And every once in a while, she'll bring me down to the mount shop so I can see something that is like Wolverine's adamantium claws or the ruby slippers or something like that. Huh? Yeah, I just made a mount for Prince's yellow cloud guitar. It was yellow, and I painted it 7 times because it was very difficult to match the color. And Laura actually helped me because I think everybody sort of knows this when you're in the process of making something, you start to spiral at some point, and you just endlessly think about stuff. So literally the day before we started the installation on that case, I sanded it again, and I painted it. And I called my husband, who was in Las Vegas, and he was like, Jenny, no, don't do it. I'm like, it's already done. But it was super fun to...
It looks beautiful. And of course, I had our staff photographer at the Smithsonian take pictures of that mount. And when the project director came through, I brought him over and I was like, look at this beautiful mount. And it just totally fades away, and the paint color is gorgeous. It is the weirdest paint color you've ever seen, but
I mean, it's Prince.
Prince is just, yeah, it's Prince. So,
but it's so fun because I will be on a job site. Sometimes when I was working at the Getty over the summer, I'll make a mount and I'll text Laura the picture because I'm just like, look at it, it's amazing. And she'll do the same thing. And I think kind of the point of what we're getting at is we're all in sort of different positions. But what I have found as a contractor is it's so incredibly valuable to have not just clients, but colleagues and friends and peers within institutions, because there's so much to learn and there's no right way necessarily. I mean, there's lots of wrong ways to do our jobs, but there's not just one right way, and we have such a good time. I love having her take the objects off the mounts once we've made them, because just like Callum's video, when you showed the ship sinking down, it was, I could feel that. I could feel what that felt like to see the boat settle on that mount, and I think anybody that does this knows what it feels like when the object settles. And so getting to work with my friends and my colleagues and people that I really respect, it's the coolest thing when they pick up your mount and they put an object on it and they're just like, oh my God, and I have that with Laura's mounts as well. So
yeah, and what's also interesting to me is that because you're a contract mount maker, you're traveling to different museums and learning new techniques and handling different types of objects. And then when you come to my museum, I just watch and I learn by watching what you've done. And then of course I look at your cart and look at all of your tools. And I'm like, what's this? I'm buying this now. So it's so great for me to be able to sort of have that conversation with you and learn that way. As an in-house mount maker, I'm somewhat isolated. When I have a problem with a mount, I have to text you, or I have to text another colleague outside of the museum. So it's so nice when you're there so I just be like, what do you think about this? Is this good? And you're like, yes, that's good. Let's go. So it's really fun.
Yeah, and it definitely cuts the stress down because this is incredibly stressful work. Yeah. And I suspect that, especially when you're isolated or if you're a contractor and you're working alone, I've been a metal worker for almost 30 years, and I wake up in the middle of the night and I don't know how I know what I know how to do because I have horrible imposter syndrome. And especially, having a structural background and being a rigger, I do actually know a lot of things, but I'm just insecure because there isn't a school for this. There isn't, so having good relationships with your peers, having good relationships with institutions, and things like the Mountmakers Forum is absolutely invaluable because it takes all of us out of our basements, our shops, out of the museum, and it's an opportunity for us to learn from each other, which is the most invaluable thing, I think, at least.
Yeah, I agree.
We wanted to make a World's Best Mount Maker t-shirt to give out to somebody, but honestly, I think everyone here is the best mount maker, so I'm glad we didn't make the t-shirt, but it would have been fun.
And also, like, how do we bring an air t-shirt cannon thing on an airplane? That would be hard.
We had a t-shirt cannon, but that was a completely different logistical problem, but COVID put that out of my mind, so it's fine. But yeah, it's really amazing. I have the company that I have two very amazing partners, Deanna Hovey and Erica Johnson. We're also in the process of training a new younger woman who is occasionally mistaken as my daughter, which I don't really like. But but it just feels like such a privilege to be able to do this. And to actually be able to sit up here and have this conversation, like we've been joking about this for a while, but it means a lot to us because I think what we do for a living is extraordinary. And having the support of the people around you.
Yes, and I want to pass on a tip to everyone that Jen and I discovered on this last install that we had, and that is something called we set up a snack cabinet in a stairwell outside of the exhibit area. And so if you needed to take a moment, and sometimes in mount making, you need to take a moment, and you go back there and you eat a little piece of chocolate, you take a deep breath, and then you can get right back in there and stand on your feet for 10 hours and drill some holes and things. So it was such a great place, but it was like a safe space. So we could go back there and have like quick little meetings about what we were going to do next, and eat chocolate and breathe, and then continue on.
And something else that kind of along the lines of that is, as a contractor, even though we contract with exhibit companies, because my company aligns itself with conservation and sees it as an extension of conservation, regardless of who pays us, our client is always going to be the museum, because our client is always going to be the objects. And so I think, especially in the last situation that we had, I was in a greater position to use my position to sort of push things further during the installation process if things were not correct with construction or something like that. Whereas when you're at a museum, you're part of an institution, you have to kind of move as a unit or be part of a team. I am a lot freer with my vocabulary and my ability to say things, which when you're being a partner to a museum and you're being a partner to your collections people can actually be really good, because you can say the things that they're probably not allowed to say. Yeah, do you agree?
I totally agree with you. And as we know, on small projects and big projects and medium projects and mini projects, things go wrong and things get pushed in different directions. And so to have someone have that, for Jen to have that ability to sort of push back a little bit in a way that maybe as an in-house person I can't really do. I can push back on like, we're not doing that. But it's different. It's really useful. And this install that we've been working on, and I continue to work on, it's never ending.
I'll see you Tuesday.
Yes, I'll see you Tuesday. It's been quite a journey, and Jen left me, and we're still in the gallery every day, just cleaning glass and zhuzhing costumes and moving things around, and I miss you, buddy.
I miss you too.
I think it would be fun, and you tell me if you don't want to do this, and we could do whatever you want, because it's just you and me here, right?
Yeah.
Just like, do we want to take, that doesn't make any sense what I'm about to say. Do we want to take any questions or comments from people in the audience? Maybe talk
definitely.
about some of their experiences with it being in-house or out-house. Oh, that's not.
Or even your concerns, because I know as a contract mount maker, I'm concerned about everything all the time, and I don't feel like I have anybody to talk to about it. So.
Anyone else here have crippling anxiety?
Raise your hand.
Yes.
We've definitely got questions from our virtual audience, so I'll start there. Okay, this might be a long one, and everybody has their own path, as we all know, but what do you think is the best way to become a mount maker? Study a specific program, internships, practice, none of the above, all of the above?
I mean, All of the above, frankly. I'm not entirely certain that I'm going to apologize for saying this, and this is just my personal belief. I'm not entirely certain that higher education is the path for people to become mount makers. And I say that as a person who left higher education because of a lack of funding and had to become, I wanted to work with metal my whole life, and I could have just gone and done that. However, I think apprenticeships, I think, working within your field, being a preparator, we actually, my company has added education to our program. And so for the most part, we travel to museums that would not necessarily be served by the services that we have for financial reasons, but we go and teach them how to work with their collections and within what is possible. So I think whatever path you kind of find, it's going to be the right one. But participating in our communities is the right thing to do. Come to the forum, go to AIC, read things on Wikipedia, talk to your museum people, because if you're doing this rogue outside of it and you're not following best practices and you're not trying to learn, sorry, Laura, I just keep talking, then you're not really learning and being part of the community. So
yes, and I'm gonna add to that and say the wise and great one, Shelley Euler. When I was getting started in mount making, Shelley, I said, what do I do here? How do I learn this? And Shelley said to me, make mounts.
Yeah.
That's how you learn it. You make
very
mounts
zen.
because you're gonna make some trashy mounts, and right, but so you have to learn through that process. So.
Yeah. Well,
if you have a museum nearby that's a local museum and you can go and talk to their mount maker or connect to a mount maker through the forum, that's a great way to maybe swing by and they can show you a couple of things, and we're here for you.
When I started, my mentor took me around because I had such a metal background and I wanted to be a mount maker. But he took me around DC museums and he pointed out Shelley's mounts and Bob Fugelstadt's mounts and different people's mounts. And I had a binder of what was good and what to sort of work towards and what was maybe problematic. And looking, and if you see that it's working, that is something to emulate. So that's it. Ish.
Love it.
I kind of have a two-part question. So one, I am kind of the most outside of the museum. I work with Cinnabar, so we are the most outside of the outside. And I'm also kind of freelancing and doing the mount making thing on my own. So now incorporating the business avenue of things, the main thing I think of and I'm trying to wrap my mind around is insurance. And what that looks like. And then the second part of my question is something that lately I've been struggling with. This is a very male-dominated field. There aren't many people that look like me doing this. So imposter syndrome is something that is really real. And as of lately, the more agency I feel like I have, the more it kind of, at the end of the night, I'm like, do I know anything? Am I stupid? Yeah. Help! And, there aren't that many mount makers to begin with. So, who do I call? And, in those instances.
Well, and this is a great resource. And I'm constantly giving people, I can't give you my business card because I don't have anymore, but I always tell people to contact me because I love this and I love being able to help people, and especially with women. And I feel like looking around here, this is a very diverse group of people compared to what it has been in the past. But, being a 21-year-old certified welder and a rigger was not particularly comfy or easy. And but I believe that once you have the knowledge that you have, no one can take that away from you. So people can, pardon my language, people can talk shit to you all day long and talk down to you, but that's not you. And so all of us, the skills that we have are incredibly valuable, and nobody can take that away from us. And people look foolish when they try to. So,
thank you.
And as far as the insurance, go to the Hartford. Don't go to an insurance company that doesn't understand museums, because as soon as you say artifacts, as soon as you say objects, museums, it causes a panic. But the company, the Hartford, insures most, craters, packers, mount makers, art handlers that are contractors, and they have policies written for independent mount workers.
Hey, Jen and Laura, this is a segue with that question. As another woman preparator and mount maker, I've been ignored when I try to find work. How have you gotten past sexism in the field?
What? Well, I'm a government employee, so things feel different for me, and I feel like a tiny, sheltered little bunny rabbit, because the people that I work with it feels very inclusive, and I don't get that so much in my line of work. I know Jen has a different experience, but man, Jen, take it away.
Oh dear. I don't really know. Persistence is what is key. And I started my company for a reason, because I wanted to be compensated and paid for the skill set that I bring. And after applying for hundreds of museum jobs, I was never able to get one. So I started my first company, and then we expanded and started a new company with partners in 2014, 15. You just have to be persistent, and if people won't give you a path forward, make your own path, and don't stop doing anything. Because, and again, it goes back to what you bring to the table, and this goes for everybody. If you value what you do, make sure that you're being respected and compensated for it. It's a slippery, tricky place, because especially as makers, you have this sort of inclination. You just want to do the best job that you can, and you should, but you should value the work that you do at the same time. So I'm not sure that's really a good answer.
Know your value.
Know your value. Yeah, sorry, I don't think that's a good answer, but.
Yeah.
I have a question for Jen. So I am curious about how often the need for a structural welder comes up, because I learned to weld in art school, and I've been always on the fence since then about going back to school for actual structural welding, but it never seems to come up as a real need.
So within the museums, I'm 44, and I have not maintained my certification in the last 15 years. But when I worked as so in the museum, it almost never comes up. It's not a requirement. People don't ask about it. Personally, for me, because I worked as a rigger and I was building things that had to go through engineering review, the welds had to be certified and measured. It was a necessity. And also, if you're working in that field, it's how you get paid more money. But also, and this is sort of funny, when I was a kid, my dad was a machine guy and a mechanic, and he would always tell me, don't tell people that you can weld structural if you can't. And it's really stuck in my brain. And so as I've gotten older and as I've sort of downgraded my shop a little bit, I do a couple of massive steel mounts a year. And sometimes the mounts will weigh 900 pounds, which is ridiculous. Because I don't have a gantry, so I have to be creative about how I move them around. But I just try to be cognizant of what I'm doing. And I would say this to anybody, if you're building massive mounts, make sure that you know who's welding them, or that you're confident and comfortable that what you're doing is correct, because it may look good on the surface, but if it's not, you're just doing yourself a disservice, and you're creating a dangerous situation for people and also the object. And I never want to be responsible for damaging an object like that. So it's a good investment in yourself, but if you're gonna stay in this field and you're working under a certain size, I don't think it's necessary. I would recommend cutting your welds apart to look at them though. But Tim and I have talked about being certified because Tim is a certified welder as well, and we don't see them very often. But when I started my first company, it was what gave me an in to working in larger institutions because I could design everything and then fabricate it on my own, which is unusual, at least around DC. Usually you would send stuff out to a contract welder or a shop to fabricate. And so. Hi, Laura.
Hi. Hi. How you doing? I think this is going well.
I do too. Thanks.
Thank you for inviting me into your living room. This is
Thank you.
Really well. Going back to when you said that you do your own designing as well as fabrication, so you're creating your own 2D drawings in like CAD and things like that?
So with Bridget, we have not made the investment in any of that sort of software. But when I was doing it, I was using Vectorworks. Okay. Because I came from rigging and a theatrical background, so I was doing like arena rigging and things like that, Vectorworks was a program that we used, and it's what I was comfortable with. And so periodically, I would have to design, I designed a giant modular wall system for the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, and it was modular. It did not connect to the building, but it used a pressure system to lock itself into place. And we needed, every section of it to hold about 2,500 pounds. And so I spent a few months designing it and doing all the math, and then we send it out to an engineer for review to get the stamp on it. So I haven't had to do anything like that recently, but I can do decent architectural drawings by hand, and a lot of engineers will review those if we need them.
And, I don't draw my mounts because I don't have to, because I'm the one who's going to be putting them in, and I'm the one who's going to be taking them out. And it's interesting because I'm thinking about Jamie's talk. I can see the mount. I can flip it around in my head. I know how it's going to work. I know after I've talked to that object and spent time with it, I know where the mount needs to be and what that object needs. So I typically don't draw things out unless it's going out on loan. And if the lending repository is asking for a drawing, and then I usually just do it in Illustrator. I've taken Vectorworks training too. It's very complicated and I don't use it every day, so I don't use it every day.
Do you do mount notes for your mounts?
Nope.
Aww.
I don't, because I'm gonna be the one who removes it. I'm a federal employee. I'm gonna be there for the next 20 years. I've been there for 20 years. I'm gonna be there for the next 20. And while I do appreciate mount notes if I'm given them, I can usually figure it out. It's pretty straightforward. I just deinstalled some of your objects and had to put them back in because of situations.
I do have mount notes for you.
They're so smart, and it makes perfect sense.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Jen, I didn't know you designed that. Oh, I'm over here. Right in front of you. Straight in front of you.
Oh, God.
Yeah. I didn't know you designed that modular wall at the Hirshhorn.
I built it.
Yeah.
I crushed my fingers inside of it 3 times. Every time I had to install it, I ended up in the ER or with my hand in a snow cone to keep the swelling down.
Tex and I bonded over building that wall
Yeah,
multiple times. So thank you.
I wish that, so just to further explain, this was a modular wall unit that the Hirshhorn wanted because they have ever-changing galleries. And so the intention of this wall unit was that it would pack much like truss, and it would be skinned in FR19 fire-rated MDF. And then you could install it in about 4 hours, repurpose the panels 5 or 6 times, and then when the exhibit's over, you take it down and you stow it away, because one wall of drywall at the Hirshhorn would fill up a 20-yard dumpster. I mean, it was massive, the amount of waste that was happening. But we did this as an experiment, and although the system worked incredibly well, and again, it did not mechanically fasten to the building at all, we grossly underestimated the cost of doing it. And I think we sold it for around $30,000, and I think the actual cost was closer to 50 for this unit. However, there was conversations that the investment might be enough to buy several of them, but it never went to fruition, and secretly the company that I was working for at that time went under, so they weren't going to build them anyway. But yeah, that's very cool. Did you install it? Yeah. Oh, awesome. Sorry about that. Yeah, I still have the drawings for that, and when I'm trying to make myself feel even worse, I read them. So, but yeah, so. Down in front. Oh, hold on.
Yeah, there we go. I guess as a contractual mount maker, what are some of the difficulties that you faced working with institution? And I know there can be a lot. I guess
I'm looking
from
around
my
to
point
see
of view,
if I know any of them here.
my institution can be difficult to work for.
Well, I think this is a general issue that isn't just for a contractor. I think that institutions and exhibit companies and design firms would really benefit from talking to mount makers during the design process, because I think everyone should clap at that. Because I think we bring a lot to the table, and we could solve a lot of the problems before exhibit furniture is built, before material is chosen, because, and this is sort of my soapbox, but at the end of the day, our entire responsibility is to the object. It's to keep it safe first, and then to make an elegant and discreet display second. And sometimes the way that exhibits are made makes that a challenge. And I think that having a dialogue with us would be really beneficial. And so something that my company is trying to push for is being brought to the table a little bit earlier. I mean, as a contractor, a lot of the times we're part of the bidding process, we're part of the RFQ process, we're there in the beginning, but then once the project is awarded, we don't come around until it's towards the end. And at that point, it makes what we do exponentially more difficult, because we now have to react to how cases are built or not built, which is sometimes something that happens. And then there's a lot of triage at the end to kind of deal with it. And I think that if we were part of the conversation from the beginning, or at least closer to the beginning, it would be really helpful. And then we have gotten to a point with our company that the object and what we do is paramount. And so if we find ourselves in an uncomfortable position with a museum because they want us to do something that sort of goes against what we should be doing, we just won't do it, and we'll remove it from our scope, because we don't want to be responsible for something just because someone told us to do it. So
it probably also depends on the size of the institution. A lot of the larger museums probably have a better understanding of object handling.
Sometimes.
And the parameters, some of them, right. And maybe with and you can speak to this, but maybe a smaller museum might be more open to having those conversations early on.
We've started to realize that smaller institutions are relying on us to facilitate design decisions, object safety, even long-term storage of objects once we start working for them. We want to be as generous as possible with what we know to help people preserve their collections. So yeah, they can be a lot easier to work with. But not you. You're amazing. You're doing a fine job.
Not me. The Smithsonian's perfect.
Yep.
So I had one in front.
Oh, hi.
Hey.
Sorry.
So I had one kind of a comment, but also kind of a question. So I work with a lot of colleagues that have gone both directions. So I have coworkers that were contract that came to help us, and then a little while later we brought them in as staff, and then I've had the other staff go contract. And I was wondering how you kind of think about the balance between, you know, the grass is greener on the other side. If it is, or is it just brown on both? Or
I don't know. I think about it all the time. You know, if I'm being honest, and I think anybody that owns their own business knows, it's sort of a 24/7 thing. But mount making is also a 24/7 thing, because like Jamie said, you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with an idea, or paranoid that the thing you did is going to kill someone, which happens as well. But I don't really know. For me personally, every job I've ever had, I just wanted to do the best job that I could, and I worked really hard. And if I'm going to do that now, I'm going to do it for me. If I'm going to kill myself and work 7 days a week for 2 years straight, which is kind of what's happening right now, then I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it for myself, because I can only be angry at me then, legitimately. But I do like the idea of, I mean, if it's okay to say, we contract at the Getty sometimes, and I find it to be just the most magical, amazing place to work. You have equipment that I would never be able to afford, and you have an espresso, which is amazing, and air conditioning, which is also amazing. So I don't really know. I mean, would you want to be a contractor?
I can understand both sides of that coin. And what I would say is I think there's pros and cons to both. During the pandemic, I was getting paid, you know, and I didn't have to worry about job security because of my job for the federal government. And that was my Max Headroom thing. Sorry. So, and I do have access to the most amazing objects that you can ever imagine. And I get to work with amazing colleagues across the Smithsonian and work with amazing contractors like Jen, and every day it's something different. And I think it's probably very similar for a contract mount maker, someone who owns their own business. I think there's pros and cons to both, and you know, it's gonna sound a little bit cheesy, but I'm not there, so I can say what I want. And which is, we're so lucky to do this job. It is so fun and amazing and interesting and stressful. But like, whether you're an independent contractor or you're, you know, a staff mount maker somewhere, it's all good.
So I have sort of I don't know if it's between two cart-worthy question. It might be kind of businessy and boring, but billing, how do you bill for long-term projects? Do you take 50% down? Is it weekly, bi-weekly? Do you send in your hours?
It's when you're doing a long-term project, the first thing is to make sure that you are estimating it properly. You cannot underestimate the importance of estimating. One, it protects you because you're getting paid, and two, it protects the client from you coming back with change orders or, you know, sort of not thinking about it. But it really depends on the size of the project. And what we typically do is we set up sort of, oh, my brain just died, milestones that we meet. And so there was a time where we would do all of our templating, and then we would make all of our blanks, and then we would come back and we would do fitting, finishing. But now we break projects down where we do a chunk of templating. Then we make blanks, we come back, we fit, so that as we're going through the whole process, we set milestones where we're 25% complete, so we invoice for 25%, and then the next amount. However, when you're working with Smithsonian or federal institutions, a lot of the times you cannot invoice when you're doing these projects. So you can set your payment structure up to get a process payment for materials, like a material advancement, but you're not going to get paid until that job is sort of completed. And so that's something, you know, when you're doing mount jobs where you have 500-600 mounts and the cost of that job is over $100,000, you have to budget yourself and your time to be able to sort of get through that. Especially, I sort of joke that my company is a micro company because it's 3 people, but we do an incredible amount of business. And when we have these long-term projects, we have dotted, smaller projects in that. So we're never singly focused, which actually kind of sucks, but it's how you keep cash flow and you keep things moving. But you just want to, in your project management, you just want to be able to get to points where you can legitimately invoice a client for something that you've done. So you're making a deliverable as you're going through the process.
So the bigger jobs, you're going to get materials costs, but you're fronting the cash for that.
It depends. It honestly depends on the client. And my company is very established at this point. So luckily we don't have a lot of those concerns anymore. But and I should never say that because we'll always have those concerns. But yeah, you do have to be sort of mindful. You want to be able to make sure that you're in a position to sort of budget and take care of everything. Credit cards help, obviously, as well. But and then independent exhibit companies, you can set up a completely different payment schedule. But you do want to make sure that you're giving a deliverable before you invoice for something.
Do you have contracts that you are signing with them, or?
Always.
Always.
Always. Always. Yeah, don't do work and not get a signature. It's not a good idea.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey.
Hello.
I want to go back to a couple questions ago. So Jen, you were saying that you wish that as a contract mount maker, you were more involved in earlier stages of the process. So Laura, are there any techniques, any tips for, as someone working at an institution, how do you facilitate being involved earlier on in the process?
I have a great relationship with our exhibition development teams, and I actually came from project management, so I have an understanding of where to insert myself. And so I've been really successful with having honest conversations with our in-house designers and saying, I see this is kind of where you're headed, and here's how I can get you there. And so just having this open line of dialogue with our in-house designers, and so we can get them to where they need to be. And so I found that kind of inserting myself in a 35% design phase, and then again at maybe 95%, and then reviewing the package, then making sure everybody's on the same page, and then providing notes after at 100%, we're pretty much ready to go. And that's been pretty successful. I'm lucky that my museum has, sort of taken that as a way to move forward. And I know that that's sort of how our whole production works and fabrication works. So that's been working so far.
This is more of a commentary from a small institution perspective. My experience is a little unique in that I am the exhibition designer, the head prep, and the staff mount maker.
Yep.
And because I'm so overwhelmed, I can tell you that contract mount makers will save your life. Also that my mount making knowledge has been key for design and logistical efficiency.
Yeah.
And the addition of access hatches and everything else, because I'm the one that will go down and talk to the mount makers and, oh, this turned into a threaded rod? Okay, let me go change something then. And Johnny and I actually just talked about this recently, but it's also been incredibly important in coming up with effective, manageable time estimates needed when a large number of mounts are necessary for an exhibition. Oftentimes, if you're not familiar with the process and how long it takes,
they were grossly underestimating the time needed, and then we would be frantic on the floor during install, finishing up, and that's not best practices for the objects at all. So I cannot emphasize how important discussion between those processes and separate departments, if you have that luxury, is. Yeah, so that's basically.
Well, I think something as contract mount makers that we try to impress on our contract colleagues is sort of honesty in estimating. It doesn't benefit, and this is the same with exhibit companies as well, it doesn't benefit anyone to create a dishonest time frame, because if you're still not going to meet it, all you're doing is creating chaos and havoc. And in particular with mount making, because what we do can potentially be the most dangerous thing that happens to an object, you should be thoughtful about it. You should be able to tell your client exactly how long it's going to take to do something. And granted, there's sort of fluctuations in that, but it usually comes out in the wash of a larger project. And so people sort of just trying to slam stuff together during an installation, it's not helpful or beneficial because you're not in the right frame of mind at that point to do it. We make sure that our mounts are complete and pre-installed and tested before we go into the installation process. And the other thing is, if you're making mounts as they're being installed, and I do realize I painted the Prince mount the day before we installed it, but anyway, that's different. But a lot of times you're not getting proper off-gassing. You may not be using the proper material. And so I think it's really important for people, in particular, people hiring contractors, to engage with them, know who they are, know who the company is. Don't assume that just because you saw these 3 people's resume that the company is actually going to use them, because we're holding objects out on a limb or hanging them on a wall or suspending them from the ceiling, and you want to make sure that whoever's doing that legitimately knows how to do it and cares about it. And I think honest estimating and knowing your time is the best indicator. If someone can give you a schedule, they've thought about it. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jen and Laura.
Thanks.
You can talk to Jen, not Laura. You can email Laura at the museum and
Bye,
talk to Jen
Laura.
at the reception.
Yeah, that could have gone on. Well, we can talk about it again in about 20 minutes here. That was excellent. What? There it is. So we'd like to just appreciate the social media committee. You guys want to come up? Pierre, Luke, Shelley, Euler, and then we've already got Laura McClure. So this is your social media team.
Oh no, where's the sound? So some of you may have seen that before or heard that before. So when the IMF was founded by the Getty back in 2008, it was with the goals of creating a place for mount makers to not feel so isolated in our shops, to share our experiences, interesting challenges, tool info, and to just gather with our colleagues like we are now, right? It's great to get together in person and get inspired, learn new things, and to go back to our work recharged. But when we can't physically or even virtually gather, our social media platforms, particularly Instagram, offers another place to share these experiences and solutions. When we first started the Instagram account in May of 2020, when we were all locked at home, we mostly reposted from other people's content. And we still like to engage the community that way. So it's a great way to share our work. So please, if you're on Instagram, keep putting your work on there, and then Pierre Luc will repost it.
So, do I have sound? You can hear me? Okay.
Is it on?
Is it on? Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So, what you see is the very first meme we did, and it was a kind of just an idea that popped up in my mind, like spending time on social media, reposting the works of other mount makers exposed me to that kind of way to share different issues in our society. And once I saw this template, I found it so fun because seeing Leo that is so sad about something reminded me how we are working so hard and not being noticed in our work. So, yeah. This engaged us to... It engaged us into a whole new path. on how memes can bring us together with the relatability of a situation. And we all have some deep feelings sometimes about our work, and we have no space to share it because if we share this inside our job, it tends to get into negativity. So the memes have the power to reverse the situation and make everybody laugh about something that is very sad.
This is all very serious stuff, but we try to ride that edge between creating opportunities for us to laugh with our peers and, you know, the overall ridiculousness of everything. Cats. Including ourselves and how we love to nerd out over our work. And our tools. And our techniques. And how we manage and clean our shops.
That's a good one. This feeling of community includes our colleagues as well. We aim for our site to be inclusive and engaging, to make people feel seen in addition to being seen. This includes, we love our conservator colleagues, obviously. The mannequin makers. We have a lot of mannequin makers here. We're all mount makers. Collection staff. Registrars. Curators. Couriers. I can't watch that too long. And really, everybody on the install team, right? And don't forget our visitors. Although from what Jen was saying, we know that sometimes if you start out like this, you may end up a Mountmaker.
So we started also tackling we have a few favorite topics in making memes, and one of the smoothest one is to talk about how we are visiting exhibitions, because I don't know if everyone here feel the same, but I feel that when I'm visiting an exhibition, I need to hunt for every mount that there's in the gallery before starting enjoying the works itself. And our Instagram account has also, with the reposts especially, opened us to practice that we never heard of before. Just like these beautiful bowshine mounts, which is a kind of practice that we don't even do much in museums since it's very invasive for the specimens in some time. But it's a very fascinating way to present specimens in an exploding view. And we also, people also started to get involved in tagging us in their museum visits. And so our way to say thanks to that is by making memes with it.
With memes, sometimes we'll put a spotlight on situations that can be difficult to discuss otherwise. We try to provoke challenging but collegial conversations by making painful things laughable. We call this our edge. And we aren't always successful at staying on the right side of it. We call these slips our can of worms moments. We sometimes remove posts if the conversation moves away from museum work and into personal attacks. When it moves from the collegial, we shut it down. We never aim to hurt anyone from the IG account. So if a follower lets us know that we crossed a line for them, we communicate directly and then take the post down. A good meme lives right on that edge. It needs to spark something. A laugh, a nod, to show something interesting or useful or new, to create a reaction of some kind, but it must have an underlay of kindness and community building to it.
We just want to thank everyone for getting involved into this community, because the major point of this Instagram account is that it belongs to a whole community, not only of Mountmakers, because of course there's not 10,000 Mountmakers on Instagram, but
that's where they've been hiding.
But it's a way to share our work and also to share different point of view in the museum industry and to bind us together in better understanding what we are doing each other on our side.
Yep, and so that goes back to you guys sharing your posts, and we know we all understand that it can be tricky. You know, figure out your if you work at an institution, learn the social media policy. You know, share what you can. I know that we can't all share everything, but there's ways. You know, if you want to, there's ways. But educate yourself on that, and then share what you can, because it's useful to everybody. It lightens our days, and it also educates us. So. And also to tag us. That's the thing. I had to learn how to do that because I'm old.
Yeah.
So.
If you want to make sure we see the post, just tag us. You can tag us in stories and during your visit or whenever you want. We stay aware about that. And we love sharing different point of views about museums. We want to thank some people that helps a lot in pushing our account and giving us visibilities and also having fun working with us on different kind of memes. So I want to thank Freeze Magazine, The Art of Installation, Art Handler Mag, Fun Conservators, Art Tech Space, and IMWD 2030, which all had, at some point, a collaboration with us.
So that's awesome. Now also, you know, in this time period when we've been kind of living in the virtual land and now we're moving to hybrid, but we also, some of you might know that we had a couple of little virtual workshops over the last couple years. And I'd like to invite up some of the people who, or the people who helped with that. So Tim Scornia, please come up. He was the guy, you know him, he's the star of the brazing workshop. And so that was in April of 2021, right? Yes. Seems like only yesterday. No. And Brett and Kim and Jacob, if you're here, come on down. Jamie, come on down. Laura's here. Pierre-Luc's here. I think that's everybody except for David Latouche, who's not here on site, but all of these guys were the amazing team that put together the Mount Painting workshop that was this year in April. So it's all these guys. They're three-dimensional, everybody.
Thank you very much. I just want to let you know also, maybe you'll find me weird at the beginning of the reception later, because we will go live on the Instagram account with the majestuous Laura McClure, and we decided to create a Ask a Mountmaker Day. So this is going to happen today. This will be the first event of that kind, and Laura will probably point me out some person in which she want to ask some questions. So
be ready.
Be ready, and let me know if you want to talk to Laura.
So thank you. So now could all the Getty folks who worked on this, BJ, Elizabeth, Tim's already up here. There you are. Is Richard here? Yeah, all you guys come on up and take the floor.
So anyways, thanks everyone for coming. This was a really fast 2 days. I have to, personally, it feels like we just started. I think, is there any more steering committee members out there? I think most of them that are here are up here. But anyways,
we have a larger.
Yeah, there are more people, unfortunately, that couldn't make the conference in person. Hopefully they're watching us right now. But I just wanted to kind of give a shout out, because it's really this group that's making everything happen. You know, the IMF is, it's not an official organization. We do it out of passion for our profession. And so, you know, this is actually an open invitation to anybody. Come on up. No, but really, we want you to be a part of this. And it's great that you're here in attendance, but, you know, don't feel shy. You know, this is, you know, we want your thoughts and moving this forward. So yeah, anyways.
There are plenty of opportunities.
Yeah, there's
plenty of opportunities to volunteer.
Yes. So anyways, we just wanted to kind of put the face, you know, you see the steering committee thing, but this is who it is. So I think. And also, just kind of a very humble thank you to the Getty staff who really made this possible. We honestly could not have done it without you and your support. So we are very, very grateful for everything that you've done for making this happen. And there are a lot of people involved. So please give them a big hand. and our one and only sponsor, TrueView, and they have been an amazing supporter of the IMF over many conferences, and they continue to do it, and we're very thankful for their support. They really provided financial backing for a lot of the registration fees. So thank you so much. We very much appreciate it. So before we conclude, we just want to remind everyone that we are doing the tours tomorrow, and we had an overwhelming response, which is great. We're going to do our best to accommodate everybody, so please just come at 10 o'clock and we'll sort it out, and we'll storm the museum, we'll have fun, promise.
So you'll meet here on the terrace?
Yes.
And we'll break you into groups. No, it's okay. No, I was just thinking of the logistics.
Yes,
We'll
come
break
here
into
at 10
groups.
o'clock,
Wear
bring
your
your badge.
Yeah,
Very
wear your
important.
badge. It's
Yes.
super important.
Yes.
What time do the shuttles start in the morning from the hotel?
9:30.
9:30. So the shuttles will bring you up again from, the shuttles will bring you up again from the hotel at starting at 9:30, so you can sleep in a little bit.
Reception, and also wanted to give a shout out to Laura, who is our incredible designer for our t-shirts. So if you have an opportunity to get a shirt, they're great. And they always support a good charity, good arts-related charity. This, our current shirt is benefiting inner city arts here in Los Angeles, but we will be doing more shirts, promise. So please, yeah, it's a great way to support not only the IMF, but a great art-related charity. And yes, we do have another. Brett?
Well, I'm very happy and pleased to say that barring any unforeseen calamity, COVID, we will be hosting the next IMF conference in Boston at the Museum of Fine Arts. And so we'll be very happy to welcome you all there.
All right. Let's eat and drink. Oh, wait, and sorry. Before presenters, if you could come up to the stage, we would love to get a photo of everybody.
I heard a collective groan there, yes. We've done it every year.